They say the most powerful person in the room is often the one everyone else overlooks. One quiet Saturday afternoon at a $1 million mansion in Los Angeles, a 3-year-old pointed at the most beautiful woman in the room and uttered 3 words that shattered a marriage in seconds. This is the story of Harper Delgado, the woman the world looked at but didn't bother to notice. If you want to note what happened next, like turn on notifications and comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has progressed. Let's begin. Harper Delgado had learned a long time ago that the body keeps its own kind of record. Not in diaries, not in photographs. In the way a woman's shoulders drop when she crosses a certain threshold. In the specific tension that forms at the base of her neck the moment she hears a particular set of footsteps clicking down a marble hallway. In the involuntary way her jaw tightens before she has consciously processed that something is about to go wrong. She was on her knees in the dining room of the Mercer estate when she heard those footsteps. It was a Saturday, the kind of Los Angeles afternoon that looked like something out of a magazine. Warm gold light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the courtyard fountain running quietly outside, the estate itself so aggressively beautiful that sometimes Harper forgot there were hours of her life she spent inside it that she would never be able to get back. She was scrubbing a grout line between 2 slabs of imported Italian marble that cost more per square foot than she earned in a week. Her knees ached. Her lower back had been sending her quiet warnings since noon. She had not eaten since the granola bar she'd split with Luna that morning, a fact she had noted and then folded away because there was no point in dwelling on it. Luna was 3 years old and sitting against the far wall of the dining room, cross-legged on a folded moving blanket that Harper had quietly placed there so her daughter wouldn't have to sit on the cold floor. Luna had a picture book open in her lap and was making soft sounds to herself, narrating the images the way she always did when she thought no one was listening. Little murmured descriptions of horses and trees and a yellow house by the sea. Harper could hear her from across the room, and that sound, that ordinary soft voice, was the thing that made all of it survivable. The footsteps stopped at the dining room entrance. Harper felt it before she turned her head. Celeste Ashford did not announce herself with words. She announced herself with temperature. The air in a room changed when she entered it, the way weather changes in the minutes before a storm that has been building somewhere offshore for a very long time. Harper had been working in this house for 2 years and 11 months. She had learned the architecture of Celeste's moods the same way she had learned the layout of the estate, out of necessity, with no pleasure in the knowledge. "You missed a section," Celeste said. Her voice was low and precise. It was the kind of voice that had been educated into smoothness, every rough edge filed away by decades of private schools and careful social management, until what remained was something that sounded like silk but functioned more like a blade. Harper set the brush down and looked at the section of grout Celeste was indicating. She had not missed it. She had cleaned it 40 minutes ago when she started this row, and it was clean, demonstrably clean, visibly clean. She knew that. Celeste knew that. "I'll go over it again," Harper said. "You should have gotten it right the first time." "Yes, ma'am." There was a pause. Harper kept her eyes down and picked the brush back up. This was the correct behavior in these moments, the behavior that made things end faster, that reduced the duration of the discomfort to something manageable. She had calibrated this response through trial and error over the years, had learned that acknowledgement without argument was the path that cost her the least. She told herself this was practical and not humiliating. On most days, she almost believed it. Celeste walked further into the room. Her heels made clean, deliberate sounds on the marble. She was dressed in cream-colored linen, and her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of effortless precision that took real effort and considerable money to achieve. She was, by any conventional measure, extraordinarily beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made people in rooms momentarily stop what they were doing and recalibrate. Harper had watched it happen dozens of times. A new contractor walking in for a meeting, a catering staff member arriving for an event, even the security personnel who had been on the property for years. They all did the same thing when Celeste walked into a room. They paused. They reordered themselves. Harper had stopped pausing a long time ago. She had learned that what Celeste looked like and what Celeste was were 2 different buildings that shared the same exterior facade. "I need the east wing floors finished by 4, Celeste said. Harper looked up briefly. It was 2:47. The East Wing was 14 rooms. She was currently in the dining room of the West Corridor, which meant she had not started the East Wing. "I'll do my best," Harper said. "That's not what I asked." "I understand." "Do you?" Celeste tilted her head slightly. It was a gesture that looked from a distance like thoughtfulness. Up close, Harper had learned it was something else entirely. "Because I ask you something and you give me these non-answers, I'll do my best." "I understand." "What does that even mean?" "It means I'll finish by 4. "Good." Celeste looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary. Her eyes moved, not quickly, not with any apparent intention, but in that slow, specific way that communicated the assessment was deliberate, down and then up, a cataloging. "You've got something on your collar." Harper didn't look down. "I'll change." "What's she doing in here?" Celeste's gaze had shifted to Luna, who had looked up from her book and was now watching the two women with the focused, unself-conscious attention that only very small children can sustain without social consequences. "I didn't have anyone to leave her with today," Harper said. "She's not in the way. She won't touch anything. She shouldn't be here." "I know, I'm sorry. It won't happen again," Celeste finished for her. "Right. That's what you said last time." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to speak to Adrian about the children policy. This can't keep being an exception." Harper felt the familiar cold settle in at the base of her sternum. It was not fear exactly. It was the thing that lived on the other side of fear, the dull weight that came from years of knowing exactly what was at stake and exactly how much power you did not have. She had the right to ask questions. She knew that theoretically. In practice, she had learned that asking questions cost more than they returned. She looked at Luna, who had gone back to her book. She picked the brush back up. "I'll have the East Wing done by 4, she said. Celeste stood in the room for another moment, not doing anything, not saying anything, just standing there with the quality of someone who understands that presence itself can be a form of pressure. Then she turned and walked toward the antique sideboard along the far wall, where a crystal pitcher of water sat on a silver tray with cut glasses arranged in a row, the way the household staff had been trained to maintain the public rooms. Celeste poured a glass, drank half of it with the slow deliberateness of someone performing an ordinary act for an audience, set the glass down. Then she picked up the pitcher. Harper was still on her knees, turned back to the grout line, brush in hand, when she heard the sound, the subtle shift of crystal moving through air. And she turned her head 1 second too late. The water hit her full in the face and poured down her neck and chest in a single cold flood. It drenched her hair, her collar, the front of her uniform, the rag in her left hand. She gasped. It was involuntary, the body's honest response to cold shock, and stayed on her knees for a moment with water running down her face and dripping from her chin onto the marble she had just finished cleaning. The room was very quiet. Harper heard Luna's book close. "You left a streak," Celeste said. Her voice was completely even. "On that section there. You can see it now that the light's hitting it differently." Harper did not look up for several seconds. When she did, Celeste was setting the crystal pitcher back on the silver tray with the precise, unhurried care of someone replacing a museum artifact. She smoothed the front of her linen blouse. She turned and walked toward the dining room entrance. 4 o'clock, she said, without turning around. "The whole East Wing, and change your clothes. You look ridiculous." She left. The sound of her heels faded down the corridor. Harper stayed on her knees for a moment longer. The marble was cold through the fabric of her pants. Water continued to run from her hair, and she let it, because she needed the seconds it took to restore her breathing to something that functioned. She could hear her own heartbeat. She became methodically aware of each wet layer of clothing against her skin, the clammy cling of her collar, the weight of her soaked hair against the back of her neck. She was 42 years old, and she was on her knees on someone else's floor, and a woman who had never done a day of physical labor in her life had just poured a pitcher of water over her head in front of her 3-year-old daughter. That thought was clear and complete, and she allowed herself exactly 3 seconds with it. Then she put it away. She heard small feet on the marble. Luna was standing in front of her, picture book pressed flat against her chest with both arms, eyes wide and dark and very serious. She was wearing the small yellow sneakers that Harper had bought at the consignment store 3 weeks ago and had stayed up until midnight cleaning with a toothbrush because Luna had asked if she could wear them to the park, and Harper wanted them to look new. "Mommy," Luna said, "I'm okay, baby." "You're wet." "I know. It was an accident." The word sat wrong in her mouth. She said it anyway. Luna looked at the doorway where Celeste had gone. Then she looked back at Harper. Her face was doing that thing it sometimes did. That particular processing expression, the slow movement of comprehension behind her eyes that always reminded Harper that 3 years old was not as young as it sounded. "It was an accident," Luna said. "Let's get you back to your book," Harper said. She stood up. Her knees protested. She gathered the wet cleaning rag from the floor, folded it, tucked it into the pocket of her apron. She ran the back of her hand across her face to clear the water from her eyes, and she did not look at the doorway where Celeste had gone, and she did not allow herself to feel what was pushing at the inside of her chest, because there was a 4 o'clock deadline and 14 rooms and a daughter who needed to see her mother functioning. She crossed the room to where Luna had been sitting and knelt again to straighten the moving blanket, to settle Luna back down with the picture book, to smooth the small girl's hair back from her forehead with one wet hand. "Read the horse one again," Harper said. "Okay," Luna said. She opened the book, but she didn't start reading right away. She looked at her mother's wet face for another moment with those serious dark eyes. "She hurts you," she said. It wasn't a question. Harper's chest tightened in a specific, particular way that had no good name. "Read the book, Luna." Luna read the book. Harper went back to the grout line. She did not finish the East Wing by 4. She finished it at 4:47, moving through the rooms with the focused, mechanical efficiency of someone who has learned to make her body do work that the rest of her has already quit. By the time she reached the last room, she was dry, but her back was broadcasting steady pain up through her left hip, and she was running on water, actual water, from the tap, because she had not been offered food and had not asked for any, which was a choice she told herself was practical and not degrading. Celeste did not check the East Wing. Harper had known she wouldn't. She gathered her daughter and her bag and the small collection of Luna's things, and she walked through the estate's service entrance and out to the employee parking area, where her car, a 2009 Honda Accord with a replaced alternator and a passenger side door that required a specific jerk and lift technique to open from the outside, sat under a jacaranda tree that had dropped purple blossoms across the hood. She opened the back door and buckled Luna into the car seat, and then she stood beside the car for a moment in the evening air before getting in. Los Angeles was doing what it always did at dusk, turning beautiful in that effortless, indifferent way that made the whole city feel like a backdrop for someone else's story. The hills were going dark against a sky the color of embers. Somewhere on the other side of the estate's wall, the city was moving through its evening with no knowledge of and no interest in the woman standing in a service parking lot beside an old car with purple flowers on the hood. Harper got in the car. She drove home. She did not cry until she was in the shower, with the water running loud enough that Luna couldn't hear her from the other room, and even then she kept it brief because she was too tired for anything sustained. She had been doing this for 2 years and 11 months. She had been counting. The Mercer estate occupied 7 acres in the hills above Bel Air, a compound that had been built by Adrian Mercer's father in the early 90s and expanded twice since. First when the original tech money came in, and again after the Series C round that had made Adrian himself one of the 12 youngest self-made billionaires in American history, a distinction that had been reported in enough publications that it had stopped feeling meaningful and started feeling like wallpaper. The estate had 12 full-time household staff, a rotating security team, a groundskeeping crew, and a household manager named Gloria Reyes, who had been with the family since Adrian was 19 years old and who was the closest thing to institutional memory the property possessed. Adrian Mercer was 38. He had dark eyes and the kind of face that photographs well without being immediately readable in person. Not guarded exactly, but contained, like someone who had learned early that public life required a certain internal architecture. He was, by general consensus among people who knew him professionally, a genuinely decent man operating inside systems that did not always reward decency. He had built 3 companies, sold 2, kept the third, and grown it past anything he had initially imagined. He ran his foundation with the same methodical commitment he brought to everything else. He was, in the specific vocabulary of the world he moved through, a good catch. He had met Celeste Ashford at a benefit dinner 18 months ago, and within 6 weeks had told his closest friend that he'd met someone who finally made the noise quiet. That was the phrase he had used, which was specific enough that his friend had remembered it and repeated it back to him months later when Adrian announced the engagement. Someone who finally makes the noise quiet. The engagement had been announced at a private dinner for 40. The ring was a 4-carat oval solitaire. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months out, and Celeste had been managing the planning with the focused intensity of a military campaign, which Adrian had told himself was admirable efficiency rather than something else. He liked things to be organized. Celeste organized things. He liked clarity. Celeste was clear about what she wanted. He liked competence. Celeste performed competence impeccably. He had confused performance with authenticity for 18 months, and the specific mechanism by which he had done this was something he would examine for a long time afterward. On the Saturday that Celeste poured water over Harper Delgado in the dining room, Adrian was in his study on the second floor, 3 hours into a call with his board about the acquisition terms for a company they were looking at in Austin. The call had run long, the way board calls always ran long, circling the same concerns with slightly different phrasing, the way water finds the same low points in a landscape, regardless of which direction it approaches from. He ended the call at 6:15 with no clear resolution and the familiar low-grade frustration that came from spending 3 hours talking about a decision that ultimately would be made in 40 minutes of actual thinking. He came downstairs. He poured himself a glass of water in the kitchen. He walked through the main corridor toward the study on the ground floor, where he intended to do the 40 minutes of actual thinking, and he passed the open door of the dining room and stopped. It was the flowers that stopped him first. The arrangement on the sideboard had been moved, slightly, and Adrian had the unconscious domestic awareness of someone who had lived in the same space long enough to register small dislocations without always knowing he had. Then he saw the wet section of marble near the far wall, still faintly darker than the surrounding floor, with the specific geometry of a large spill rather than a cleaning spill. And then he saw the picture book on the folded blanket against the wall. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He walked further in. He looked at the wet floor. He looked at the arrangement of the crystal pitcher on the sideboard, slightly off from its usual position, set down with a different angle than the household protocol specified, the small carelessness of something replaced in a hurry or without attention. He looked at the water glass with the lipstick mark on its rim. He picked up the crystal pitcher, and it was light, nearly empty. He set it back down. He stood there for a moment longer, doing the arithmetic of the room. Then he walked to the security office. The Mercer estate had a camera system that had been upgraded twice in the last 3 years, covering exterior perimeter, entry points, and most of the ground floor interior. The security room was staffed during active hours and monitored remotely the rest of the time. Adrian had access to the full archive through his security credentials and had used it twice before, once when a piece of art went missing during an event and turned out to have been moved by a florist, and once when there was a question about a contractor's access times. He sat down at the workstation, called up the dining room feed, and scrolled back to 2:47. He watched for 6 minutes. When it was over, he sat very still at the workstation and looked at the paused frame on the screen. Harper still on her knees, water streaming from her hair and face, the pitch of her shoulders, the way she did not move for 3 full seconds. He thought about the picture book on the folded blanket. He thought about the way the room would have looked and sounded to a 3-year-old child watching from 8 feet away. He scrolled back further. He watched more. He was in the security office for 2 hours and 20 minutes. What he watched in those 2 hours and 20 minutes was not a single incident. What he watched was a pattern, a careful, consistent, deliberate architecture of diminishment that had been constructed across weeks and months in the background of his own house while he was on calls about acquisition terms and Series C metrics and foundation disbursement schedules. He watched Celeste deny Harper's lunch break on days she knew the shift ran long. He watched her assign doubled cleaning schedules before estate events and then inspect the results with visible contempt for work that was, by any standard, meticulous. He watched her make comments about Harper's body while Harper was in earshot. The specific surgical comments that are technically about something else and functionally about exactly what they appear to be. He watched Harper's shoulders absorb each of these moments the way certain materials absorb impact, not without effect, but without visible break, which is a different thing. He watched his own absence in each of those frames, his own comings and goings, his own focus directed everywhere except at the woman on her knees on his marble floors, the woman he had passed in corridors for almost 3 years and spoken to in the brief, transactional vocabulary of employer and employee, the woman whose daughter sat against walls on folded blankets and read picture books about horses and yellow houses and had apparently been witnessing things that 3-year-old children should not have to witness. At 9:15, he found the recording from 3 weeks ago. It was from the security camera in the East Corridor, positioned to cover the main art wall, and it had captured a conversation between Celeste and her friend Mara, a woman who came to the estate approximately twice a week and who Adrian had always found slightly too agreeable to be entirely trustworthy. The conversation had taken place in the corridor rather than inside a room, which was an error of geography that the women had apparently not considered. He turned the volume up. He listened to 42 seconds of audio that rearranged the structure of the last 18 months of his life. He sat at the workstation for a long time after that. He drove to Harper's apartment the next morning. He had her address from the household employment files. He sat outside for several minutes before getting out of the car, during which time he was aware of himself in a way that was not entirely comfortable, aware of what his arrival would look like, aware of the specific power differential of a billionaire showing up at a staff member's apartment on a Sunday morning, aware that there was no version of this that did not carry freight he had not fully accounted for. He got out of the car. It was a modest building on the east side of Culver City, 3 floors, external walkways, small balconies with the careful personalization of people who don't have much space but make use of what they have. Potted plants, a bicycle locked to a railing, a child's drawing taped to a sliding door. Harper's unit was on the 2nd floor. He climbed the stairs. She opened the door in a work shirt and jeans, holding a cup of coffee, and the expression on her face when she saw who was standing at her door was one that Adrian filed away and did not examine in the moment, because examining it in the moment would have required more composure than he currently had. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I know this is your day off. I know how it looks. I need to talk to you." She looked at him for a moment. Behind her, he could hear the television, a cartoon, the specific bright audio of Saturday morning children's programming. "Give me a minute," she said. She went back inside. He heard her settle Luna with something, the crinkle of a snack bag, the volume on the television adjusting upward slightly. Then she came back to the door and stepped out onto the walkway, pulling it mostly closed behind her, coffee still in her hand. She looked at him. "The dining room," he said. "Yesterday." Something moved across her face. Brief, quickly controlled, the expression of someone who has been bracing for a version of this conversation and is now doing rapid analysis of which version it is going to be. "I can explain," she started. "I watched the footage," he said. She stopped. "All of it," he said. "Not just yesterday. I went back 6 weeks." The morning was cool and quiet around them. Somewhere in the parking lot below, a car started. Harper held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at Adrian with an expression that he could not immediately read. Not because it was complicated, but because it was too honest to be comfortable. A kind of rawness that came from exhaustion and a suspension of the careful management that had clearly been operating for a very long time. "What do you want me to say?" she asked finally. "I want you to tell me the truth." A pause. Long enough that he began to think she wasn't going to respond. Then she looked down at the coffee cup. "Which truth?" she said. "There are a few." "Start wherever it makes sense to start." She looked up at him. "You watched the footage," she said. "You already know." "I know what I saw. I want to know what it was like." Another pause, longer this time. She turned slightly and looked out over the parking lot below, at the ordinary Sunday morning geometry of cars and concrete and the thin gold of early light across the city. Her jaw was set in a way that was not anger, or not only anger, but the particular tightness of someone containing something that has been contained for a very long time and is now being offered the opportunity to stop. "She called me the fat maid," Harper said. Her voice was level. Not to my face, mostly, to her friend, to whoever was on her phone. Like I couldn't hear, like it didn't matter if I could hear. She paused. Like I wasn't a whole person in the room. Adrian didn't say anything. "I need this job," she said. "Luna's asthma medication is $412 a month without coverage. I have a car with 160,000 miles on it, and I have an apartment, and I have her, and this job is—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand why I didn't say anything." "I understand why you didn't say anything." "Do you?" She looked at him directly for the first time since she had stepped out onto the walkway. "Because people say that. They say they understand. And then nothing changes because understanding doesn't cost anything. And changing something costs a lot." He had no answer for that would have been honest and also comfortable. He chose honest. "You're right," he said. "I said it too fast." She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of a particular hostility that had been there a moment before. "There's more," he said. "There's something I need to tell you that I found. In the footage. Something from 3 weeks ago." "What?" He told her about the East Corridor recording. He repeated as precisely as he could the 42 seconds of audio between Celeste and her friend Mara. Harper listened with the stillness of someone who has suspected something for a long time and is now watching the suspicion become a known fact, which is a different experience from being surprised. "She said that?" Harper asked. "Yes." She turned back to the parking lot. "So it was never about the money," she said quietly. Then she caught herself, looked back at him. "I don't mean yours, I mean, she always talked about how the wedding was going to establish her, how it was going to open certain doors. I thought maybe I was reading too much into it because She stopped. "Because you didn't like her," he said. "Because I had reason not to like her," Harper corrected. "Which is different." He nodded. "Yes, it is." They stood on the walkway in the morning light, and the cartoon sounds continued through the door and down in the parking lot. A dog was barking at something with the cheerful persistence of a dog that has not yet learned that most things it barks at are not going to change. "What are you going to do?" Harper asked. Adrian looked at his hands. He had been asking himself the same question since 9:15 the night before, sitting at the security workstation with 42 seconds of audio running through his head and the weight of 2 years of his own inattention settling into something he wasn't going to be able to put down. "End it," he said. Harper looked at him. "The engagement," he said. "The whole—" He paused. "All of it." She was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to go quietly," Harper said. "No," he agreed. "She's not. She's going to make it about me." "Probably." Harper exhaled. She looked down at her coffee, which had gone cold, and then back up at him with an expression that was tired and clear-eyed and entirely without illusion. "My daughter told me this morning that the wet floor yesterday was not an accident," she said. "She's right," Adrian said. "She's 3 years old." A pause. "She's 3 years old and she knew something was wrong, and I told her it was an accident." She stopped. Her jaw tightened again. "I've been telling her things were accidents for 2 years." Adrian was quiet. "I'm not a victim," Harper said, with a sudden sharpness that was not directed at him. "I need you to understand that. I made choices. I stayed because I decided to stay. I told my daughter things were accidents because I decided that's what she needed to hear. Those were my choices, and I own them." "I know," he said. "But they were made inside a system," she said, "inside a situation where the options were what they were. And that—" She stopped again, pressing her lips together. "That's what nobody ever says out loud, that the choices were made inside conditions that made some options impossible. And that matters." He looked at her. In 3 years of passing each other in corridors with the transactional vocabulary of employer and employee, he had never once heard her say anything like this, and he was ashamed of that in a way that was clean and specific and without excuse. "I know," he said again, and this time he said it differently. From inside the apartment, through the door that was mostly closed, a small voice said, "Mommy?" Harper straightened. "Coming, baby." She looked back at Adrian one more time. "When are you going to do it?" "Today," he said. She nodded once, slowly, with the look of someone taking in information that is larger than the moment in which it is delivered. "I have Luna," she said. "I can't be at the house today. I'm not asking you to be there, but it's going to come back to me, whatever she says." "I know," he said, "and I'm going to be ready for that." She studied him for a moment with the focused, unromanticized assessment of someone who has learned to read people without the benefit of the doubt. "Okay," she said finally. She went back inside. Adrian stood on the walkway alone for a moment, with the morning air in the parking lot and the sound of the cartoon through the door. Then he walked down the stairs to his car. He drove back to the estate. He found Celeste in the sunroom, on the phone, laughing at something the person on the other end had said, and he waited in the doorway until she registered his presence and wrapped up the call and turned to him with the particular smile she had, wide and warm and completely manufactured, which he now saw with a clarity that had the quality of nausea. "You're up early," she said. "I need to show you something," he said. He showed her the footage from the dining room. He showed her the footage from the East Corridor. He played all 42 seconds of her voice talking to her friend Mara about what the marriage would establish for her and what it would open, and how the foundation money could be redirected once she had access to the full charitable trust. And he watched her face while she watched herself. And what he saw on her face was not shame. He had half expected shame, had prepared himself for the possibility of a version of this that involved some real cracked open honesty. But what he saw instead was the specific rapid calculation of someone recalibrating their strategy in real time. Her eyes moved. Something behind them reorganized. "I can explain," she began. "Don't," he said. "Adrian, I watched 6 weeks of footage, Celeste." He kept his voice flat. 6 weeks. Not one incident, not one bad day. 6 weeks of a consistent, deliberate... He stopped. He breathed. "She has a daughter. That little girl sat in that dining room yesterday and watched you pour water over her mother. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she understood exactly what she saw," he said. "She told her mother this morning that it wasn't an accident. She's 3 years old." Celeste looked at him. The calculation behind her eyes continued its rapid, quiet work. "I'm asking you to leave," he said. "I'm asking you to leave today. You're going to throw away an 18-month relationship because a cleaning woman and her toddler..." "Don't," he said again. The word was quieter this time, which made it carry more weight. "Don't say that." Celeste stopped. Adrian removed the engagement ring from the inside pocket of his jacket, where he had placed it that morning after taking it from the box on his dresser, and he set it on the sunroom table between them. It caught the morning light and sent small refractions across the wall, which seemed like the kind of detail that would have been significant in a different story. "I want you out of this house by 4 o'clock, he said. He walked out of the sunroom. He heard her voice behind him, the first crack in the smoothness, something underneath the silk finally audible. But he did not stop, and he did not turn around. He walked through his house and out through the rear terrace and stood in the courtyard by the fountain, where the water ran with its ordinary patient sound. And he stood there for a long time with his hands in his pockets, and the sun moving across the garden, and the knowledge of what was coming settling into him with the weight of something that is not yet visible but is already certain. Celeste would not be out by 4 o'clock. He knew her. She would not go quietly, would not accept the geometry of this situation as he had defined it, would not allow herself to be repositioned from wrongdoer to wronged without a sustained and public campaign. She had too much to lose and too much capability, and not nearly enough of what it would have taken to absorb this with anything approaching grace. He stood by the fountain and he thought about Harper on her knees on the marble floor with water running down her face. He thought about a 3-year-old girl pressing a picture book to her chest with both arms and watching with serious dark eyes. He thought about the specific phrase Harper had used on the walkway that morning, inside conditions that made some options impossible. He stood by the fountain for a long time. His phone began vibrating in his pocket. He looked at the screen. It was Celeste's attorney. He looked at the name for a moment, at the early morning courtyard around him, at the fountain, at the pale sky above the estate walls. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and walked inside to call his own. Celeste's attorney's name was Douglas Hale, and he called 4 times before 9 in the morning. Adrian did not answer any of them. He sat in his ground floor study with the door closed and his own attorney, Richard Bow, on speakerphone, and he went through what he had methodically and without the kind of emotional narration that Richard would have found unhelpful. Richard was 61 years old and had been handling Adrian's legal affairs since the second company, and he had the particular quality of someone who had seen enough human catastrophe in a professional capacity that very little surprised him anymore. Not with callousness, but with a kind of practiced steadiness that Adrian had always found useful when his own steadiness was under pressure. "The footage," Richard said. "You have it archived and backed up." "Yes. Copies in at least 2 locations. I'll have Marcus do it this morning." "The audio from the East Corridor, you're certain of what she said?" "I played it 4 times. A pause on the line. Adrian could hear Richard breathing, the specific rhythm of someone running through chess moves. "The charitable trust language, that's significant. If she made any formal moves toward accessing that during the engagement period, we have grounds beyond personal conduct. I haven't looked at the trust records yet." "Look today. This morning." Another pause. "She's already called Douglas Hale." "I know. He's going to come at you with a narrative. Breach of promise, emotional distress, defamation if you go public with the footage. He's going to try to build a version of this where she's the wrong party. I know what she's going to do." "Adrian." Richard's voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more direct in the specific way that meant he was setting aside the professional and speaking as something closer to a friend. "How are you?" Adrian looked at the window. The courtyard was empty, the fountain running, the garden in the flat, late-morning light that made everything look slightly overexposed. "I watched 6 weeks of footage," he said, "of my house, my staff, someone I employ being systematically." He stopped. He chose a different approach. "I'm functional," he said. "Let's keep moving." Richard moved. By 11:30, 3 backup copies of the relevant footage and audio had been secured to separate servers. By noon, Adrian's security director Marcus Chen had walked him through a full accounting of what the camera system had captured and confirmed that the archive was complete and unmodified. By 12:40, Adrian's head of household operations, a precise and unflappable woman named Diane Castillo, had come to his study at his request and sat across from him and told him, with a careful and professional restraint that cracked only slightly at the edges, that several members of the household staff had been aware of the situation with Ms. Ashford for some time. "How long?" he said. Diane's hands were folded on her knee. "For most of them, since the fall. Maybe earlier for some." "Why didn't anyone tell you?" She met his eyes. There was no accusation in her voice. There didn't need to be. "Mr. Mercer, you were engaged to her." He sat with that. "I'm not saying it was right," Diane said. "I'm saying it's what happened. People make assessments about who will be believed." He looked at the window again. "Who witnessed the dining room incident yesterday?" "I wasn't in the building, but I spoke to Elena this morning. She was in the pantry hallway when it happened. She heard it." A brief pause. "She didn't go in." "She was afraid to." "Yes." He looked back at Diane. "I need to know who saw what and when. I need to know if anyone documented anything, even informally, dates, times, whatever they wrote down in whatever format." "I'll talk to everyone today?" "Gently," he said. "Of course." She stood to go and then paused. She turned back with the expression of someone who has something to say and is deciding whether the professional context permits it. "Mr. Mercer," she said, she's exceptional. At her work, yes, but that's almost beside the point. She has never once complained in 3 years. She has never come to me with a grievance or asked for anything beyond what was in her employment agreement. That kind of... She stopped. Some people mistake that for weakness, she said finally. It isn't. He held her gaze. I know, he said. After Diane left, he sat alone for a moment and thought about Celeste, who was still in the building. He could feel her presence in the estate the way you feel a pressure system moving through before the weather actually changes, a kind of low static at the edges of the air. She had not left by 4. Of course she hadn't. He had known she wouldn't. He had heard her on her phone twice from different corridors, her voice pitched to carry without seeming like it was trying to carry. The specific acoustic management of a woman who understood that sound could be a weapon if you deployed it correctly. He had caught fragments. Something about her timeline being disrupted, something about a conversation with her publicist, something about documentation. Documentation. He stood up from the desk. He found her in the master suite, which she had not vacated, standing at the window with her phone in one hand and a glass of white wine in the other, which was either an act of genuine composure or theatrical indifference. And with Celeste, the line between those two things had always been difficult to locate. I asked you to leave, he said. I heard you. She turned from the window. She had changed from the morning's linen into something darker, which he noted without knowing why he noted it. I'm not leaving until we've had an actual conversation. We had a conversation. You showed me footage and told me to get out. That's not a conversation, Adrian. That's an execution. You poured water on my employee. I spilled Don't. His voice was steady, but the word arrived with a weight that stopped her mid-sentence. I watched it happen. I watched you pick up the pitcher and walk toward her and pour it over her head. There's no angle from which that is a spill. Celeste looked at him. The calculation was still running behind her eyes, but she had covered it with something that looked superficially like hurt. The wide-eyed, compressed lip expression of someone presenting emotional injury as a defense. He had seen it before. He recognized it now the way you recognize a landmark after you've understood what it actually is. She provoked me, Celeste said. He stared at her. She's been insubordinate for months. Little things. The way she looks at me, the tone she uses when she answers questions, She has this way of... She stopped, reorganized. I'm under enormous pressure with the wedding planning, and she makes everything harder, and I snapped. I'm not proud of it, but if you look at the full context... I looked at the full context, he said. 6 weeks of it. There's no context that explains what I saw. She's been recording me, Celeste said. Did you know that? Her daughter, she coaches that child to say things. That whole scene yesterday was staged. The little girl with the "she hurts mommy." She made a dismissive gesture with the wine glass. That child has been coached. The specific coldness that moved through him at this was different from anger. It was quieter than anger and colder and considerably more lasting. She's 3 years old, he said. Children lie, Adrian. Children are coached. Domestic workers with financial motivations use their children. Stop talking. She stopped. Luna is 3 years old, he said. She sat against the wall of my dining room and watched a grown woman pour water over her mother's head, and she told her mother that night that it wasn't an accident. That is not coaching. That is a child accurately describing what she witnessed. He paused. And you know that. You know exactly what that was. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted. Some decision got made in the interior processing that he could now read after 18 months, with a clarity he hadn't had before. The hurt expression dissolved. What replaced it was something harder and considerably more honest. You're going to side with your housekeeper, she said. I'm going to act on what I saw. Your housekeeper, she said again, and the way she said it, the precise flatness of her emphasis, was the thing that told him everything he needed to know about the distance between who Celeste Ashford was and who he had believed her to be. Get out of this house, he said. Today. I will have your things boxed and sent to wherever you want them sent, but you need to leave this property today. He turned and walked out. He was in the corridor when he heard the wine glass hit the wall of the master suite. Not thrown at anything, but thrown, which was specific enough information that he filed it and kept walking. Gloria Reyes was waiting at the end of the corridor. Gloria was 64 and had been with the Mercer family since Adrian was in college, a small woman with gray-streaked hair and the specific kind of moral authority that accrues to people who have watched a family grow up and have never abused their proximity to it. She was standing with her hands folded in front of her with the expression of someone who has been choosing the right moment and has determined this is it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." 8 months ago, Ms. Ashford told Harper that if she said anything to you about the way she was being treated, she would see to it that Harper's immigration status was reviewed. Gloria's voice was completely steady. "Harper has a green card. She's been here 15 years. Her daughter was born here. There's nothing actually questionable about her status. But Ms. Ashford told her that she had a friend at a certain agency who could make the process of reviewing it very uncomfortable, regardless of the outcome." Adrian looked at her. "Harper didn't tell me," Gloria said. "She told me 3 months ago, in confidence. She was frightened. She asked me not to say anything." A pause. "I honored that. I'm not sure now that I was right to." He stood in the corridor for a moment. "Thank you," he said. He went back to the study and he called Richard Bow, and he told him about the immigration threat, and he heard Richard's silence on the other end of the line. The specific silence of a man recalibrating the magnitude of the situation. "That changes the exposure," Richard said. "I know. It moves this from personal conduct into potential criminal territory, threatening someone's immigration status as a means of coercion." "I know, Richard." A pause. "She needs to know this," Richard said. "Harper. She needs to know that what was done to her has a legal name and she has recourse. I'll talk to her. She may need her own attorney. I'll make sure she has one." He called Harper that afternoon. She picked up after 2 rings, which meant she had been near her phone. He could hear Luna in the background, the specific high-pitched cheerfulness of a toddler narrating something to no one in particular. "She's still here," Harper said. It was not a question. "She'll be gone by tonight," he said. A pause. "What do you need to tell me?" "You said you needed to tell me something." He told her about what Gloria had said. He kept it factual, no commentary, no editorializing, because he had the sense that Harper would want the information without the frame, that being offered someone else's outrage on her behalf would feel like another form of management, which was the last thing she needed. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he checked that the call was still connected. "She said that to me," Harper said finally. "In October. Last year." "I know. I didn't tell Gloria until—" She stopped. "I didn't know what to do with it. It felt like—" Another stop. "You spend enough time being told that your options are limited, you start to believe it. You stop testing the walls. You should have options," he said. "Real ones. I want you to have access to an attorney. Whatever you decide to do with the information, I want you to have proper legal counsel first." Another silence. "Are you going to go public with this?" "With the footage?" "With any of it." He thought about it honestly. "If she makes it necessary," he said. "I'm not going to manufacture a public conflict. But if she decides to take this into a public arena, which I think she will, then I'm going to respond with the truth. She'll say I fabricated everything. I know. She'll say I'm trying to get money from you, that Luna was coached, that I—" Her voice caught briefly and then steadied. "She'll say things about me that will follow me, that will follow Luna." He thought about how to answer that honestly. "She might," he said, "and I'll be ready for that. But I want you to understand something, Harper. The footage exists, the audio exists, witnesses exist, and a woman who has just been caught making threats against a single mother's immigration status to keep her from reporting abuse is not in a strong legal or moral position to do damage to you." The line was quiet except for Luna's background narration, which had shifted to what sounded like an extended monologue about a spoon. "Okay," Harper said finally. "Okay." "I trust you," she said. There was no warmth in it. It was not the tone of someone offering a gift. It was the tone of someone stating a decision they have arrived at through evidence and reason and have not made carelessly. "I'm not saying that easily. I want you to know that." "I know," he said. He ended the call and sat at his desk for a long time. Celeste left the estate at 7:41 that evening. She did not leave quietly. He had known she wouldn't, had accounted for it in the way you account for predictable weather. And still the specific execution of her exit was impressive in its tactical precision. She moved through the house in the final hour before departure, making sure she was visible to every staff member present, delivering a performance calibrated for maximum ambiguity, composed enough to appear wrongly accused, upset enough to generate sympathy, specific enough in what she said and didn't say to plant seeds that would take time to clarify. He was watching from the second-floor landing when she stopped in the main foyer and spoke to two of the household staff who were present. Elena, who had been in the pantry hallway during the dining room incident, and a young man named Brendan who had been with the estate for 6 months and who had no direct knowledge of anything. "I want you both to know," Celeste said, with the controlled sincerity of someone who has rehearsed this, "that what's happening here is not what it appears to be. I love this house. I love the people in it." A pause. Sometimes the most honest person in a room is the one who gets the least credit for their honesty. Elena looked at the floor. Brendan looked at Celeste with the expression of someone trying to determine what an appropriate response was. Celeste moved toward the front door, her luggage handled by a car service she had arranged. She paused at the threshold. One last beat, perfectly timed, a woman taking in a home she was being asked to leave. And then she walked out, and the door closed, and she was gone. Elena looked up at the second-floor landing. Adrian looked back at her. Elena said nothing. She went back to work. He stood at the railing for a moment. The foyer was quiet and large and lit with the specific warm light that made it look like the interior of a life that was going well, which was an architectural fiction that cost several $1,000s a month to maintain. He went to his room. He did not sleep well. The next 4 days were the specific kind of quiet that precedes something loud. Adrian knew how to read the silence, had read versions of it in boardrooms and negotiations and public moments where the other party was organizing their next move behind the composure of the present one. He spent those 4 days doing 3 things: working, talking to Richard Bow, and thinking about Harper Delgado. He sent her the attorney referral on Monday, a woman named Sandra Okafor who specialized in employment law and workplace harassment, and who Richard had described as formidable, which in Richard's vocabulary meant something specific and good. Harper acknowledged it with a text that said, "Thank you. I'll call her." He did not hear from Harper directly for 2 days after that. He heard about Harper through Diane, who had conducted her quiet interviews with the household staff, and who came to his study on Tuesday afternoon with a legal pad covered in precise handwriting and read him a set of documented incidents that dated back 14 months. He listened without interrupting. When Diane finished, she set the legal pad on his desk and looked at him. "There's one more thing," she said. "From Elena." "Tell me." Ms. Ashford approached Elena 4 months ago and asked her to report on Harper's schedule. When she arrived, when she left, who she spoke to, when she used her phone. She offered her $200 a month. He looked at the legal pad. What did Elena do? She didn't take it, but she also didn't tell anyone. A pause. Until now. He thought about Harper, 2 years and 11 months of showing up and working without complaint and believing that her options were limited because everything around her had been engineered to make her believe exactly that. "Is Elena all right?" he asked. Diane looked slightly surprised by the question. Yes, she's frightened. She thinks she's going to lose her position." "She's not going to lose her position. I'll tell her that." "Tell everyone that," he said. "No one loses their position for coming forward now. That needs to be said clearly." "Yes, sir." After Diane left, he sat at his desk and looked at the legal pad. 14 months of documented incidents. A surveillance operation run against a single mother. An immigration threat deployed as a silencing mechanism. He picked up his phone and called Richard. "It's building," he said. "I've been following," Richard said. Douglas Hale reached out again this morning. What does he want? He wants a meeting. He's framing it as a conversation about mutual resolution, which means she wants money. What kind of number? A pause. He implied 7 figures, framed as compensation for emotional distress and reputational damage resulting from the termination of the engagement. Adrian was quiet for a moment. She wants to be paid to go away. That's one reading. The other reading is that this is an opening position in a negotiation, and the actual ask is the meeting itself. She wants to see how you respond, measure how concerned you are. Schedule the meeting, Adrian said. You're sure? I want to look at her, he said. In a room, across the table. I want to see what she brings. Richard was quiet for a beat. I'll set it up for Friday. The meeting was at Richard's firm on Friday at 11. Celeste arrived 7 minutes late, which was deliberate. Not the late of someone disorganized, but the late of someone who understands that making people wait is a small exercise of power. She came in with Douglas Hale and a second attorney whose name Adrian didn't catch, and she was dressed in the specific shade of pale gray that photographed well, and red is composed under pressure. She sat across from Adrian and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, or perhaps had seen and not recognized. It was stripped of the warm performance and the social management. What was underneath was cool and focused and entirely without apology, and he found it, in a deeply uncomfortable way, more honest than anything she had shown him in 18 months. I appreciate you agreeing to meet, Douglas Hale said. I want to hear what you have to say, Adrian said. We believe there's a path to a private resolution here that serves everyone's interests. Walk me through what you're asking for. Hale glanced at Celeste, a brief, professionally practiced look that communicated the client had been briefed and the client had approved this. We're asking for $4 million in settlement for emotional distress, reputational harm, and— No, Adrian said. Hale paused. Mr. Mercer, if you'll allow me to— No, he said again. I'm not going to pay Ms. Ashford $4 million. I'm not going to pay her any amount, and I want to tell you why. He looked at Celeste directly. Because what I have on the other side of this table is security footage, audio recordings, and the sworn testimony of multiple witnesses documenting a sustained pattern of workplace harassment and abuse targeting a member of my staff. I also have documentation of a threat made against that staff member's immigration status intended to coerce her silence. He paused. In case Douglas hasn't fully briefed you on the exposure that moves this from civil territory into potential criminal territory. Which means the question on this table is not what I will pay you. The question is what you are going to do to manage your own exposure. The room was very quiet. Celeste looked at him. The coolness behind her eyes did not change, but something else did. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the quality of her stillness. The way temperature changes in a room when a window is opened somewhere you can't see. You're bluffing, she said. I'm not. You're not going to go public with this. It damages you. It damages the estate, the foundation, the optics of your— The optics of what? He said. She paused. Of a woman being abused in my house while I didn't notice? He kept his voice level. Of an engagement I ended when I found out the truth? Celeste, what exactly do you think the public narrative is here? Douglas Hale put a hand on the table, a practiced moderating gesture. Perhaps we should take a short break. There's nothing to break from, Adrian said. I'm not negotiating. I came here to tell you directly, in a room with your attorneys present, that there will be no settlement. If you choose to take this into public space, I will respond with everything I have. And what I have is considerable. He stood up. He looked at Celeste one last time. I'm sorry, he said. And he meant it. Not for ending it, not for the meeting, not for what was about to happen, but for the specific thing that preceded all of it, that he had let himself be convinced that the noise inside a certain silence was nothing, that he had stopped hearing what was happening in his own house because someone had made it comfortable for him not to. I'm sorry for my part in this, he said. I want you to know I understand that my inattention was not neutral. Celeste looked at him with the cool, focused expression and said nothing. He walked out. He was in the elevator when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. In the car, heading back to the estate, he listened to the voicemail. It was a woman's voice, brisk, young, the compressed cadence of someone accustomed to talking to people who are busy. Mr. Mercer, my name is Alexis Crow. I'm a reporter with the Los Angeles Examiner. I'm working on a story about your recently ended engagement, and I'd appreciate a chance to speak with you before we go to publication. We've been in contact with Celeste Ashford, and we're planning to run the story Friday evening. I'd love your comment before then. My number is... He stopped the voicemail. He looked out the window at the city moving past. She had moved faster than he expected. He called Richard. She's already talking to press, he said. How fast? They're running Friday. That's 3 days. Richard breathed on the other end of the line. What's the story? Did the reporter give you anything? Just that they've spoken to Celeste, he paused. Which means she's controlling the narrative. Whatever she told them first. What do you want to do? He watched the city outside the window. The ordinary Friday traffic of Los Angeles. Indifferent and continuous. The city's fundamental unwillingness to be affected by any individual drama, no matter how significant it felt from the inside. He thought about Harper, who had told him that she trusted him in the tone of someone making a decision they had arrived at through evidence and reason. He thought about Luna, pressing a picture book to her chest with both arms. He thought about what it meant to have evidence and do nothing with it. To possess the truth and keep it private because private was more comfortable, because public was loud and messy and cost something, and because the people who could be protected by the truth were not the people who appeared in the photographs in the publications that were about to run a story about Celeste Ashford's broken engagement. Call Sandra Okafor, he said, Harper's attorney. Tell her what's happening and make sure Harper knows before Friday. I'll call her now. And Richard, he paused. Tell Alexis Crow I'll speak to her, but on my terms and on my timeline, not hers. Tomorrow morning, with documentation. Richard was quiet for a moment. You're going public. Celeste went public first, he said. I'm just going to make sure the whole picture is visible. He ended the call. He put the phone in his pocket. The car moved through the afternoon traffic, and the city continued to be indifferent. And somewhere on the east side of Culver City, a woman named Harper Delgado was not yet aware that her name was about to appear in a story in the Los Angeles Examiner, written by a reporter who had heard only one side of it, and that the world she had been trying to protect her daughter from was about to knock on her door with a camera and a deadline, and no particular interest in the conditions that had made her options limited for as long as she could remember. His phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. It was Harper. He answered. She called me, Harper said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear what was underneath the steadiness, the particular controlled tension of someone who has just been informed that the thing they feared is already in motion. A reporter, Harper said. From the Examiner. She called my personal number, Adrian. My personal number. I don't know how she got it. He closed his eyes briefly. Celeste, he said. She told the reporter I fabricated everything, that I coached Luna, that I've been trying to position myself for a payout since the first month I worked there. A pause. She told her I have a history of making false claims against employers. That's not true. I know it's not true. Her voice went sharp and then pulled back. But it's going to be in print, and people are going to read it before they read anything else, and that's the version that sticks. That's how this works. I've seen it happen to other people. He looked out the window. The city was going amber in the late afternoon light, that specific Los Angeles hour when everything looks temporarily forgivable. Harper, he said, I'm speaking to the reporter tomorrow morning with documentation. The footage, the audio, the witness statements Diane collected, all of it. Silence. That's my story too, she said quietly. I know. That's why I'm calling Sandra Okafor tonight. Nothing goes out without your knowledge. You decide what gets used with your name attached. That's not my call to make. Another silence, longer. He could hear her breathing, measured, deliberate, the breathing of someone talking themselves through something rather than away from it. Luna asked me today why I was sad, Harper said. I told her I wasn't sad. I was thinking. She said thinking and sad looked the same on my face. A short breath that might have been a laugh in a different context. She's 3. She's remarkable, he said. She's going to see this, Harper said. Someday she's going to be old enough to search her own mother's name, and she's going to find whatever version of this story gets told first, and... She stopped. I need the right version to exist. Not just for me, for her. He heard what she was saying underneath what she said. It will, he said. I'll make sure of it. The silence this time had a different weight. Not hesitation, but arrival. The quality of someone reaching the end of a road they have been walking for a long time and finding that it does not end in the drop they expected. Okay, she said. Okay. Don't let her win, Harper said. It was the first time she had said anything that was not careful, not managed, not calibrated for a professional distance between them. It was just true. I won't, he said. He ended the call. The car turned through the estate gates, and the city disappeared behind the walls, and the fountain was running in the courtyard, and the house was quiet and full of evidence, and he had 3 days before the story broke, and everything he had built his name on would be tested against what he was willing to do with the truth. He got out of the car. He stood in the courtyard for a moment, the fountain running its patient sound beside him, the estate lights beginning to come on against the darkening sky. He had documentation. He had witnesses. He had 42 seconds of audio that stripped every performance down to its foundation. What he had not had for 2 years and 11 months was the courage to see what was happening inside his own walls. He had it now. He walked inside and picked up the phone and called Richard Bow and said, "We go tomorrow." Richard Bow's office occupied the 14th floor of a building in Century City that had been designed to communicate a specific kind of permanence: dark glass, clean lines, the architectural vocabulary of an institution that expected to outlast the people who moved through it. Adrian arrived at 7:40 in the morning, which was earlier than Richard had asked for and earlier than the reporter was scheduled, because he needed the hour between arrival and the interview to go through everything one more time with the precision of someone who understands that the first version of a story is the one that calcifies. Richard was already there. He had been there since 6, which Adrian could tell from the coffee cups and the spread of documents across the conference table. The organized disorder of a man who thinks best when he can see everything at once. Sandra Okafor called at 6:30, Richard said, without preamble. Harper has agreed to allow her documented testimony to be used, with specific conditions. Sandra will send the written authorization this morning. What are the conditions? Her full name and her daughter's name cannot appear in the initial publication. She wants to be identified as a household employee. If the story develops and her identity becomes public through other means, she reserves the right to speak directly at that point. Adrian looked at the spread of documents on the table. That's reasonable. It is. Richard poured him coffee without asking. The reporter, Alexis Crow. She's good. I looked at her work. She's not a gossip journalist. She does investigations, long form. She's going to push. Good, he said. You want her to push? I want the story told completely, Adrian said. A journalist who doesn't push doesn't tell it completely. Richard studied him for a moment with the look of a man who has known someone long enough to recognize when they have made a decision that is not going to be reversed by any external input. He turned back to the documents. One thing, Richard said, before she gets here. What? The trust language, the 42 seconds of audio. He paused. I had our forensic accounting team do a preliminary review of the charitable trust records last night. He picked up a single sheet from the far end of the table and set it in front of Adrian. Celeste filed a spousal authorization pre-form with the Trust's administrative office in November. It's not a disbursement request. It's a preparatory document. She filed it herself without your knowledge, and it was processed by an administrator who assumed it was a routine pre-wedding filing. Adrian looked at the document. It's not illegal on its face, Richard said carefully. But in context, given the audio, given the timeline, it establishes that she was taking concrete preparatory steps toward accessing the trust assets while simultaneously telling you she loved you. Adrian set the document back on the table. He looked at the window, at the early morning city below, still gray and unhurried in the hour before it fully committed to the day. She was building access, he said. Methodically, Richard said. This is an impulse. This was planned. He stood at the window for a moment. He had spent the night moving between sleep and a specific kind of wakeful accounting, the inventory of an 18-month period that he was now being forced to re-examine with a completely different set of interpretive tools. Every memory had a second reading. Every gesture that had seemed warm had a functional explanation. Every moment of apparent vulnerability was now suspect in a way that he could not stop applying retroactively, which was its own particular form of damage. Not grief exactly, because grief required that what was lost had been real, and the question of what had been real was precisely the one he couldn't answer. He had loved her. He had believed that. He did not know what to do with that belief now that it had been delivered back to him with the wrong address on it. Alexis Crowe arrived at 8:53, 7 minutes early, which told him something. She was younger than her byline had suggested, early 30s, compact, with a directness in the way she entered a room that was not aggressive but was entirely without the social softening that most people deployed in initial professional meetings. She shook his hand with a firm, brief grip and sat down and opened a notebook and looked at him. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "You said you'd spoken to Ms. Ashford," he said. "Tell me what she told you." Crowe glanced at Richard, then back at Adrian. A brief recalibration, so she had expected to drive the opening of this conversation. She adjusted smoothly. "She told me the engagement ended because you discovered she had developed a close friendship with a male colleague that you characterized as inappropriate. She says the characterization was incorrect and that you ended the engagement punitively, without evidence." "That's entirely false," Adrian said. She also told me," Crowe checked her notebook, "that a member of your household staff has been building a case against her for personal financial reasons, and that you have been influenced by that staff member's allegations. Also false. She provided me with what she described as text messages between herself and the staff member in question that she says demonstrate the staff member's hostile attitude toward her." Adrian looked at her steadily. "May I see them?" Crowe hesitated, the professional hesitation of a journalist being asked to show source material before publication. Then she turned the notebook and slid it across the table. He looked at the photographed text exchange on the page. The texts were real. He could see that immediately. The timestamp format, the character of the language, but they had been excerpted. The visible messages showed Harper being sharp, being clipped, responding to something with a brevity that read, in isolation, as hostility. What was not visible was what preceded each response. The messages had been surgically extracted from their context the way a sentence can be made to mean its own opposite by removing the sentence before it. He slid the notebook back. "I need to show you something," he said. He showed her everything. The footage from the dining room, which he played on the conference room monitor with Richard set up, and which Crowe watched without speaking, her notebook open in her lap and her pen not moving. The audio from the East Corridor, which ran for 42 seconds, and which Crowe listened to with the specific stillness of someone recognizing that they are hearing something that is going to change the shape of what they are writing. The documentation from Diane's interviews, which Richard walked her through with his precise and unflinching efficiency. The forensic accounting summary of the trust pre-authorization filing. And then Sandra Okafor's written authorization and the attached summary of the immigration threat, documented in Harper's own words, dated and signed. Crowe looked at the last document for a long time. "She threatened her immigration status," Crowe said, "in October of last year. To keep her from reporting." "Yes." Crowe looked up. "I need to ask you something directly." "Ask?" "Why are you giving me all of this? You could manage this privately. You have the resources to contain it, settle it, make it quiet. Why make it public?" He thought about Harper saying, "I need the right version to exist. Not just for me, for her." "Because the woman who was targeted in this house did not have the option of making it quiet," he said. "She didn't have the resources to contain it. She didn't have the ability to make it go away because she needed this job to pay for her daughter's medication. The power in this situation was entirely one-sided for 2 years and 11 months. He paused. "The only way to rebalance that is to make the full picture visible, and I have the ability to do that, so I'm doing it." Crowe looked at him for a moment. She wrote something in her notebook. "The story runs tonight," she said. "I know. It's going to be significant. I know that too." She gathered her materials and she left, and the conference room was quiet, with the particular quiet of a space in which something irrevocable has just been set in motion. Richard looked at him. "It's done," Richard said. "It started," Adrian said. He drove back to the estate. The story ran at 6:47 that evening, digital first, and within 90 minutes it had been picked up by 4 national outlets and shared enough times that the metrics had stopped being meaningful as individual numbers and had become simply an indication of scale. Crow had written it with the methodical compression of someone who understood that the facts, presented completely and in the right order, did not need embellishment. The headline was plain: Mercer ends engagement following documented staff abuse. Housekeeper describes 2 years of systematic harassment. Adrian read it once. It was accurate. He put his phone face down on his desk and sat in the quiet of his study and waited for what was coming. It came fast. His publicist called at 7:15 and described the incoming volume as a traffic event. His foundation board chair called at 7:40 and said the board was supportive, and then asked 3 questions that communicated the board was less uniformly supportive than the opening sentence had indicated. 2 of his largest tech investors sent messages through their assistants that used the phrase monitoring the situation, which in that vocabulary meant, "We are concerned and we want you to know we are concerned," without committing to any specific response to our concern. He answered Richard's calls. He answered Sandra Okafor's call. He did not answer anyone else. At 9:12, Harper texted him. 4 words. "I read it. Thank you." He looked at those 4 words for a long time. He wrote back, "How are you?" The response took 11 minutes. "Scared. But okay." Luna fell asleep early. She doesn't know yet. He thought about what to write and then wrote, "You don't have to face tomorrow alone." She didn't respond to that one. He didn't push it. He went to sleep at midnight and his phone ran with notifications through the night, and he left it face down on the nightstand and slept the specific sleep of someone who has done a thing that cannot be undone and has made peace with the irreversibility of it. He woke at 5:47 to a call from Richard. "We have a problem," Richard said. He sat up. "What?" "Mara Tyndall." The name took a half-second to place. Celeste's friend, the one from the East Corridor recording. The one present during the 42 seconds of audio. "What about her?" "She gave a statement to Media Watch last night. It ran an hour ago." He felt the specific cold of something arriving that he had not fully accounted for. "What does it say?" "She's disputing the audio." Richard's voice was careful in the way it got when the news was bad, and he was deciding how to pace the delivery. "She's saying the recording was taken out of context, that the conversation was a hypothetical, that Celeste was describing a scenario another person had described to her, not her own intentions." "That's not what the audio says." "I know, but she's providing a counter-narrative, and she has one additional element." A pause. "She's saying that Harper Delgado approached her 6 months ago and attempted to enlist her help in building a case against Celeste, that Harper told her she wanted to find a way to discredit Celeste before the wedding." The room was very quiet. Adrian stood up from the bed. He went to the window. The estate grounds were dark in the pre-dawn, the fountain running its patient sound below. "That's not true," he said. "I know. Harper never met Mara Tyndall." "I believe you, but it's in print now, and it introduces doubt about Harper's motivations that is going to—" Richard paused. "It's going to complicate the story. Crow will know it's fabricated. Crow is a reporter. She reports what's verifiable. What's verifiable right now is that a named witness is disputing the core audio evidence and making a counter-allegation against the person whose testimony anchors your account." He stood at the window. "There's more," Richard said. He waited. "Someone filed an anonymous tip with the State Labor Board last night claiming that your household employment practices have been under internal review for noncompliance with California domestic worker protection statutes. It's not true. I've already confirmed that. But the filing creates a public record, and Celeste's team will use it to imply that the estate had institutional reasons to deflect from its own conduct." He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "She moved fast," he said. "She moved very fast," Richard said. "This is not improvised. This is a prepared response. She had this ready." He thought about Celeste in the sunroom that first morning, watching the footage of herself with that rapid interior calculation running behind her eyes. He had registered it then, and had told himself he was prepared for it. He had not been fully prepared for the scope of it. "Get Sandra on the phone," he said, "and get Crow on the phone, and find out everything you can about Mara Tyndall between now and 8 o'clock. He hung up. He called Harper. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had already seen it. I saw it, she said, before he could speak. The Media Watch piece. I know, She's saying I tried to recruit her friend, Harper said. That I had a plan, that I was running some kind of operation against Celeste from inside the house. Her voice was controlled, but only just. Underneath the control was something raw and pressurized, the sound of a person holding something together through effort rather than ease. I have never spoken to Mara Tyndall. I have been in the same room as her 3 times, and never once had a conversation beyond hello. I know. But it doesn't matter what's true, Harper said. It matters what people read, and they're reading this. Harper. My cousin called me at 5 in the morning. My cousin. To ask me if it was true, because she read it and she had a question. A sharp exhale. People who know me, people who have known me for 20 years, they're calling to ask if it's true. He felt the weight of what he had set in motion. The specific and irreversible weight of a public story once it has left the controlled space of intent and entered the chaotic space of reception. He had known this was possible. He had told himself he was prepared for it. Sitting with Harper's voice in his ear at 5:50 in the morning, the preparation felt considerably more theoretical than it had at midnight. I'm going to fix this, he said. You can't fix a story that's already running, she said. I can add to it, he said. I can make sure the counter-narrative gets refuted with specificity. Crow is a serious journalist. She is going to want to verify Mara Tyndall's claim, and when she tries to verify it, it's going to fall apart because it's fabricated, and fabrications fall apart under pressure. How long does that take? He didn't have a dishonest answer available. A day. Maybe 2. In 2 days, Harper said quietly, the version of me that tried to set up a wealthy man's fiancée for personal gain is going to be the version that 1 million people already believe. He had no answer for that would have been honest and also comforting. I know, he said. The silence on the line was different from the other silences. It had a specific quality. Not anger at him, not accusation, but something closer to the sound of a person recalculating at a fundamental level, reassessing the ground they are standing on and finding it less solid than they had decided to trust. I have to take Luna to her asthma checkup this morning, Harper said. Her voice had gone flat. Not cold, but the flatness of someone conserving resources for what the day was going to require. After that, I need to think. Okay. I need to think about whether She stopped. Whether you what? A long pause. Whether I can keep going forward with this the way we planned it. Whether my name attached to this publicly is something that protects me or something that destroys me. He understood what she was saying. He also understood that he did not have the standing to tell her what to decide, because the cost of every decision in this situation was being paid primarily by her and not by him, and that asymmetry was not something he could argue his way around. Whatever you decide, he said. I'll support it. She ended the call without responding to that. He stood at the window until the sky began to lighten. By 8 o'clock, Richard had a file on Mara Tyndall that ran to 11 pages. Mara Tyndall was 34, worked in brand consulting, had a professional history that involved 3 firms in 6 years, and 2 of those departures had generated quiet settlements with former colleagues, the specific pattern of someone who created conflict and had the social capital to have it absorbed without public consequence. She had known Celeste since college. She had been present at the Mercer estate approximately twice a week for the duration of the engagement. She had also, Richard discovered through a contact at a competing media outlet, been paid a consulting fee by Douglas Hale's firm 2 weeks before the engagement ended. He read that twice. She was on retainer, he said. It's circumstantial, Richard said, but the timeline is, she was on retainer before I ended the engagement, he said. Before the dining room incident, Celeste was already preparing. He sat at his desk and looked at the document. Celeste knew, he said. Before Saturday, she knew something was coming. Or she was preparing for a contingency, Richard said. Either she knew the relationship was at risk and was building a defense in advance, or, he paused, or what? Or she was planning something herself, something that would have required a prepared narrative to manage the fallout. The room was very quiet. Adrian thought about the immigration threat in October, the surveillance request to Elena, the pre-authorization filing on the charitable trust, the retainer paid to Mara Tyndall 2 weeks before the engagement ended. He thought about the footage from the dining room, Celeste picking up the crystal pitcher, the deliberateness of the gesture, the total absence of impulsivity in the movement, the way she had set it back down afterward with care, the way she had told Harper what to fix before she left the room. He thought about a woman who had spent 18 months building something very carefully, layer by layer, and who had then, in a Saturday afternoon moment in a marble dining room, done something in front of a child and a security camera that appeared, on the surface, like a loss of control. She did it on purpose, he said. Richard looked at him. The dining room, he said. She knew there was a camera. She knew the camera angle. She's been in that room 100 times. His voice was level, but the thing running underneath it was not level at all. She poured water over Harper in front of her 3-year-old daughter on a Saturday afternoon, knowing I might come home and knowing the camera was running because... He stopped. He ran the logic forward. Because she wanted me to find it. Richard was very still. She wanted me to react, Adrian said. She wanted to create a confrontation that she could control the narrative of. Harper as the aggressor. Harper as the scheming employee. The engagement ended not because of what Celeste did, but because I was manipulated by my household staff. He pressed his hand flat on the desk. She was going to end it, on her terms, with her narrative in place. But she needed a triggering incident, and she needed it to look like it came from Harper's side. That's... Richard started. She miscalculated, Adrian said. She didn't know Luna was in the room. She didn't know a 3-year-old would say what she said. She didn't account for the child. The silence in the room had changed quality entirely. It was no longer the silence of two people processing information. It was the silence of a space in which something has been understood that cannot be ununderstood. She has a plan, Richard said finally, a complete one. The Tyndall statement, the labor board tip, the counter-narrative, this is the plan. He paused. Which means there's more. There's more, Adrian agreed. He picked up his phone. He called Sandra Okafor directly. Sandra, he said when she answered, I need you to go to Harper today. In person, not by phone. I need you to go there and I need you to tell her something important. What? Tell her that this is bigger than we thought, he said. Tell her that Celeste had a plan before any of this became public, and that we are inside that plan right now. Tell her that the next move is going to come fast, and it's going to be directed at her specifically. He stopped. And tell her I need to know today whether she is willing to stand up publicly, with her name, her face, her daughter. Not because I'm asking her to, because if she isn't, I need to know now so I can find another way. Sandra was quiet for a moment. You understand what you're asking? Yes. You're asking a woman who has been managing her invisibility for years to choose maximum visibility. In a public fight she didn't start, against someone with significantly more resources. I know what I'm asking, he said. That's why I need her to say yes or no herself. Not through me, not through you, her decision. Another pause. I'll go now, Sandra said. He ended the call. He stood up from the desk and walked to the window, and the estate was bright in the morning light, and the courtyard fountain ran with its patient, ordinary sound, and everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, and nothing was the same. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. A new number, not Celeste's primary line. The text contained a single image file. He opened it. It was a photograph. A photograph of Harper, taken from a distance outside her apartment building in Culver City. She was loading Luna into the car seat. It was time-stamped from this morning, 6:43, which was before dawn, which meant before the Media Watch story ran, which meant someone had been outside her building in the dark. Below the photograph, 3 words. She's not safe. He stared at the screen. His hands were entirely still, and his mind was moving very fast, and the courtyard fountain ran its patient sound below, and the morning was bright and ordinary, and he understood, with a cold and absolute clarity, that what he had believed was a public relations conflict was something considerably more dangerous than that. He called Marcus Chen. I need 2 people at Harper Delgado's address in Culver City within the hour, he said. Discreet, civilian vehicles. I need them there now. Done, Marcus said. What's the threat level? Unknown. Treat it as real until I say otherwise. He hung up and called Sandra Okafor back immediately. Are you with Harper yet? Pulling up now. Don't let her leave alone. Don't let Luna leave alone. I'm sending security. They'll be there within the hour. Tell Harper not to be alarmed. Adrian, what happened? Someone was outside her building this morning before sunrise. He looked at the photograph on his screen one more time. Harper's back, Luna's yellow sneakers catching the early light, the car seat buckle, the ordinary geometry of a mother and her child doing an ordinary thing while someone watched them from the dark. Someone sent me the photograph. Sandra went very quiet. Tell her, he said. Tell her everything. And Sandra, stay with her until my people arrive. He ended the call. He looked at the photograph one last time. Then he forwarded it to Richard, to Marcus, and to a number he had never used before but had kept in his phone for 3 years against the possibility of exactly this kind of morning. A detective named Cal Rourke, who did not ask unnecessary questions, and who understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a situation was the thing that hadn't happened yet. Cal Rourke arrived at the estate at 9:47 in a gray Ford that had seen better decades and parked it in the service lot without being asked to, which was the first indication that Richard had described him accurately. He was 53, built like someone who had been larger once and had compressed without losing the structural memory of it, with gray at his temples and the specific quality of stillness that belonged to people who had spent years in rooms where things were about to go wrong and had learned that movement before the right moment was waste. Adrian met him in the study. Rourke looked at the photograph on the phone for 11 seconds without speaking. He didn't touch the phone. He looked at it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, not with emotion, but with the focused extraction of specific information from a visual field. Telephoto, he said. Minimum 50 meters. Whoever took this didn't want to be seen, but they wanted you to know they were there. It's a message, Adrian said. It's a demonstration, Rourke corrected. There's a difference. A message tells you something. A demonstration shows you what someone is capable of. This is the second one. He handed the phone back. You said it came from an unknown number. A number I've never seen. It won't trace back to anyone useful. It never does. Rourke sat down across the desk without being invited, which Adrian noted and did not mind. Tell me about Celeste Ashford. Start with what she wanted and work forward. Adrian told him. He kept it factual and sequential, the same way he had told it to Richard, the same way he had told it to Crow. But this time the audience was different, and the details he emphasized were different, because what Rourke needed was not the emotional or legal architecture of the situation, but its tactical one. He talked for 14 minutes. Rourke did not take notes. He sat with his hands rested on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, and he listened with the total absorption of someone for whom listening was a professional skill they had refined over decades. When Adrian finished, Rourke was quiet for a moment. The trust pre-authorization, he said. She filed it in November. Yes. And the retainer to Tyndall was 2 weeks before the engagement ended. Yes. So the earliest point at which she began active preparation was November. He paused. What happened in November that she would have needed to prepare for? Adrian looked at him. Something changed in November, Rourke said. Something that made her decide the contingency plan needed to become active. Before November, she was maintaining. After November, she was building. He looked at Adrian directly. What changed? Adrian thought about November. He went through it the way you go through a room looking for something you've misplaced, methodically, without assumption, resisting the urge to look only in the places you expect to find it. November. The Austin acquisition talks had started in November. The Foundation's annual disbursement review, a trip to New York for 3 days for a conference. Celeste had not come on that trip. She had said she had commitments. He had not questioned it. I went to New York for 3 days in November, he said slowly. Celeste stayed here. Alone in the estate? With staff present. Rourke looked at him. I'm going to need access to the November security footage. Marcus Chen pulled the November archive in 40 minutes, and Rourke went through it in the security office with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who knew what he was looking for without knowing yet what form it would take. Adrian sat beside him and watched the footage move and said nothing because he had learned in the first 30 minutes of knowing Rourke that the man's process required silence, the way certain chemical reactions required specific temperatures. At 11:22, Rourke stopped the footage. He rewound it 14 seconds and played it again. On the screen, in the timestamp of November 14th at 2:17 in the afternoon, Celeste was in the estate's private office, a room adjacent to Adrian's study that contained the household's administrative files, the secondary server for estate operations, and a locked filing cabinet whose key Adrian kept on his personal keyring. On the screen, Celeste was at the filing cabinet. The cabinet was open. That cabinet was locked, Adrian said. Apparently not, Rourke said. He watched Celeste remove a file, photograph several pages with her phone, replace the file, and close the cabinet. The whole operation took 4 minutes and 20 seconds and was performed with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who has done something once in rehearsal and is now doing it in execution. "What's in that cabinet?" Rourke asked. "Foundation governance documents," Adrian said. His voice had gone flat. "Trust amendment records. Beneficiary designations." He stopped. "The original charitable trust deed." Rourke looked at him. "She photographed the trust deed," Adrian said. "And whatever else was in that file," Rourke said, "in November, before she went to Douglas Hale, before the Tyndall retainer." He leaned back slightly. "She wasn't building a defense. She was building a case for something bigger than the settlement number Hale floated in the meeting." Adrian's phone rang. It was Richard. He answered. "I just got off the phone with the state attorney's office," Richard said, and his voice had the quality it got when the news had moved beyond bad into a category that required a different vocabulary. "Someone filed a formal complaint this morning alleging financial misconduct in the administration of the Mercer Charitable Trust. The complaint references specific documents, internal governance records, that have not been made public." The study was very quiet. "She filed it," Adrian said. "The complaint is anonymous, but the documents referenced they're internal, Adrian. They're not publicly available. Whoever filed it had access to the originals or copies." He looked at the paused security footage on the monitor. Celeste's hand on the open filing cabinet. "She has copies," he said. "She photographed them in November. She's been sitting on them for 8 months. A silence on Richard's end that had a specific weight to it, the weight of a man recalculating the scope of something that has just become significantly larger than its previous dimensions. "She was never going for the $4 million, Richard said. "No," Adrian said. "She was going for the trust." The number that lived inside the Mercer Charitable Trust was not 4 million. It was not 40 million. It was a figure that had been built over a decade of structured giving and strategic endowment, and which now sat at a value that made the 4 million settlement demand look like the opening bid in a game whose real stakes had been concealed from one of the players the entire time. Adrian stood up from the desk. "Get me in front of the state attorney's office today," he said. "This afternoon, with the November footage and the full documentation of the threat against Harper's immigration status and the Tyndall retainer records." He paused. "She's using a false complaint to create legal leverage. I want the full picture in front of the right people before she gets another move." "I'll make the calls," Richard said. He hung up. Rourke was watching him with the steady, uninflected attention of a man who has just watched someone absorb a significant blow and is assessing the recovery. "You didn't know about the trust play," Rourke said. It was not a question. "No." "She's good," Rourke said. It was not admiration. It was the specific professional acknowledgement of someone recognizing a capable opponent. "Yes," Adrian said. "The photograph of Harper. The surveillance this morning." Rourke stood up. "That's not her style. The trust play is precise and calculated. Surveillance, an implicit threat. That's messier, more emotional." He paused. "Someone else is involved." Adrian looked at him. "She didn't take that photograph herself," Rourke said. "She hired someone, which means there's a third party in this who has a different risk profile than she does, and a different calculation about how far this goes." He moved toward the door. I need to find out who she hired, and I need to do it today. Do it, Adrian said. Rourke left. Adrian stood alone in the study for 30 seconds. Then he drove to Culver City. Sandra Okafor's car was parked outside Harper's building when he arrived. A clean black sedan that sat with the settled presence of something that had been there a while. One of Marcus's security personnel, a compact woman named Torres, who Adrian knew from estate events, was in a vehicle across the street, visible to him because he knew to look and invisible to anyone who didn't. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. Harper opened the door before he knocked. She had clearly not slept. It was not the obvious disarray of sleeplessness. She was dressed, composed in the surface sense, her hair pulled back, but it was in her eyes, which had the specific flatness that comes not from a single bad night, but from the accumulated weight of many of them arriving at once and being processed without the relief of sleep to compress them. She looked at him for a moment without speaking, then she stepped back from the door. He came in. The apartment was small and organized with the particular care of someone who has learned to make a limited space function well. Everything in a specific place, nothing wasted, a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator with the bright, decisive colors of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned to doubt her own instincts. Luna was asleep on the couch under a blanket with a small stuffed horse held against her chest, which stopped him for a moment in a way he hadn't anticipated. Sandra Okafor was at the kitchen table with a coffee and a legal pad. She looked at him over the rim of her cup with the expression of a woman who has been doing this long enough to read a room in the time it takes to enter it. "Sit down," Harper said. He sat. Harper remained standing, her arms crossed low at her waist. Not defensively, but the posture of someone who needs to feel their own physical structure right now, who needs the proprioceptive confirmation that they are intact and upright. "Tell me about the photograph," she said. He told her. He told her everything. The photograph, Rourke, the November footage, the filing cabinet, the state attorney's complaint. He watched her face move through it, not dramatically, not with the visible emotional processing of someone performing their response, but with the internal, incremental movement of someone absorbing information that confirms something they have been afraid to fully articulate. When he finished, the apartment was quiet except for Luna's breathing from the couch. "She was never going to let this just end," Harper said. "No. She needed it to go a specific way. The engagement ending was, it was supposed to happen on her terms." She looked at the window. "I was supposed to be the reason. The scheming employee. She was going to take the trust money and take the narrative and leave you holding a story about a man who got manipulated by his staff." She paused. "And I was going to be the person that story was about for the rest of my life." He had nothing to say to that because it was exactly right. "She miscalculated," Sandra said from the table. Her voice was calm and precise. Luna was in the room. The camera caught everything. The sequence didn't go the way she planned, and now she's running a contingency under pressure, which means she's making decisions faster than she should. "Faster means sloppier," Adrian said. "Faster means more dangerous," Harper said. She looked at him directly. "Someone was outside this building before sunrise, with a camera, with my daughter in the frame." Her voice was steady and absolutely cold. "I need you to understand something. I have been careful my whole life. I have been quiet. I have absorbed things because the calculation said absorbing was cheaper than fighting." She stopped. She breathed once, deliberately. "That calculation just changed." He looked at her. "I want to go public," she said. "My name, my face, my story. Not through a lawyer's written statement, not filtered through your documentation. Me, speaking directly." She glanced at Luna asleep on the couch and then back at him. "My daughter was in a photograph taken by someone hired to intimidate me. I am done being manageable." Sandra set her pen down. "Harper," Sandra said carefully, "going public directly means full exposure. It means press contact, social media, public scrutiny of your personal history, your finances, your—" "I know what it means," Harper said. "I've been the person that other people get to define my whole life. Because I was quiet. Because I was manageable. Because I needed the job." She looked at Sandra. "She's going to define me anyway. She already started. At least if I speak, the definition is mine." The room was quiet. Adrian looked at Harper standing in her small kitchen with her arms crossed and her eyes clear, and the absolute bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has just decided to set it down, not because it got lighter, but because she is done letting the weight of it determine her direction. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Sandra said. "When?" Harper asked. "Today," Adrian said. "This afternoon. I have a meeting with the state attorney's office at 3. I want you there, not as a witness, as the person this happened to." He paused. "Can you do that?" Harper looked at Luna. She looked back at him. "Give me an hour," she said. He waited downstairs in the car. Rourke called at 12:43. "I found the photographer," Rourke said. "Name is Danny Fires. Freelance, runs surveillance work for 3 or 4 firms in the city. He was hired through a shell contact that traces back to a private security consultancy called Meridian Group." A pause. "Meridian Group has done contract work for Douglas Hale's firm on 4 previous occasions. Hale hired the photographer. Hale's firm used an intermediary to hire the photographer through a consultancy they've used before, which gives Hale 2 layers of separation. But the chain is documentable." Another pause. "There's one more thing." He waited. "Fires has been active on Harper's building for 6 days," Rourke said. "Not since the story broke, 6 days. Since before the engagement ended publicly. The car was hot in the midday sun and Adrian sat very still in it. She had Harper under surveillance before I ended the engagement," he said. "Before the dining room incident," Rourke said. "Before any of this became public." He thought about the dining room, the picture, the deliberateness of it. He thought about what he had told Richard in the study. She wanted me to find it. She was triggering something she had already prepared for. She was ready for every version of this, he said. "Almost every version," Rourke said. "She wasn't ready for the child." Adrian looked up at the building, at the second-floor walkway where Harper's door was visible. "Send everything you have on Fires in Meridian to Richard," he said. "He needs it before 3 o'clock. "Already compiling." He hung up. He sat in the hot car and he thought about 6 days of surveillance on a woman who had done nothing except try to protect her daughter and do her job and survive inside conditions that had been specifically engineered to make survival the only available ambition. He thought about Harper saying, "That calculation just changed." Harper came down the stairs at 1:15 with Luna on her hip and a bag over one shoulder and Sandra Okafor behind her. She had changed. Dark slacks, a clean white shirt, her hair down, the presentation of someone who understood that how you appear in a room before you speak is already part of what you're saying. She was not dressed to be impressive. She was dressed to be undeniable. She stopped at the car. She looked at him through the window. He got out. "She's been watching me for 6 days, Harper said. Not a question. He had texted her the update. Yes. She absorbed this with a stillness that was not the stillness of someone shutting down. It was the stillness of someone who is very, very angry and has chosen to let the anger make them precise rather than loud. "Where do you want Luna during the meeting?" she asked. "My estate. Gloria will look after her. She'll be safe there. Marcus has the security on full active protocol." Harper looked at Luna, who was watching a pigeon on the sidewalk with the focused academic interest of a child encountering a bird at close range. She smoothed her daughter's hair with one hand. "Luna, baby," she said softly. "You're going to go see Miss Gloria today." Luna looked at her. "The house with the fountain?" "That's the one." "Okay," Luna said and looked back at the pigeon. They drove to the estate first. Gloria met them at the front entrance with the unhurried warmth of someone who has been expecting this and has prepared for it. There were snacks visible on the hallway table, and a stuffed animal that was not Luna's but was exactly the right size for a 3-year-old's arms, and Gloria's expression when she took Luna from Harper's hip had the quality of a woman who knows precisely what the child's mother is about to walk into and has decided that the most useful thing she can do is make this particular part of it uncomplicated. Luna went without protest. She was already asking Gloria about the fountain before they reached the hallway. Harper watched her go. She turned back to Adrian. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear. There was a tremor in her hands that she was controlling through effort. Not fear, he thought, but the physical expression of adrenaline being held in check by a will that had been exercised against much larger pressures than this for much longer than today. "Let's go," she said. The state attorney's office was in downtown Los Angeles, in a building that communicated authority through sheer mass: gray stone, high ceilings, the institutional vocabulary of a system that had been here before you arrived and expected to be here after you left. Richard met them in the lobby with a paralegal and a rolling case of documents, and the expression of a man who had spent the last 4 hours in preparation mode and was now shifting into execution. He looked at Harper. "Miss Delgado," he said, "I've reviewed Sandra's documentation. What you're bringing into this room today is significant." "I know," Harper said. "They're going to ask you difficult questions." "They can ask whatever they want," she said. "I'll answer." Richard held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, with the specific economy of a man who doesn't offer approval carelessly and means it when he does. They went in. The meeting room was large and institutional, a long table, fluorescent light, the faint smell of recycled air, and old coffee. 3 people from the attorney's office were already seated. A senior investigator named Paulson, a younger attorney whose name Adrian didn't catch, and a woman in her 50s named Vera Cho, who turned out to be the deputy director of the Financial Crimes Division, which told him that the trust complaint had already elevated this beyond what he had been told to expect. Vera Cho looked at Harper when she sat down. "Ms. Delgado," she said, "you're here voluntarily." "Yes," Harper said. "You understand we're also investigating a complaint that touches on your employer." "I understand," Harper said. "The complaint is false, and I can help you establish that." Cho looked at her for a moment with the measured, uninflected attention of someone who has heard a great many people describe complaints as false and has learned to evaluate the claim through evidence rather than delivery. Then she looked at the documents Richard was laying on the table. They went through it. For 2 hours and 20 minutes, they went through every piece of documentation: the footage, the audio, the Tyndall retainer records, Rourke's chain on the photographer, the November filing cabinet footage, the immigration threat documentation, in Harper's own words, the trust pre-authorization form. Harper answered every question directly, without elaboration and without minimization, in the flat, specific language of someone who has decided that precision is the only form of self-protection that has ever actually worked for her. Paulson, the senior investigator, asked her at one point, "Why didn't you report the immigration threat when it was made?" Harper looked at him. "Because I needed my job," she said. "Because my daughter's medication costs $412 a month. Because I had been told by someone with considerably more power than me that reporting would cost me more than it protected me." She paused. "And because I had spent enough years being the person that no one believed to have a lot of confidence that this time would be different." The room was quiet. Paulson wrote something down. Vera Cho looked at the table of documents and then back at Harper. "Miss Delgado," she said, "the complaint filed against the Mercer Charitable Trust this morning references documents that are not publicly available. Based on what you've provided today, we have grounds to open a formal investigation into how those documents were obtained and how the complaint was filed." She paused. "That investigation will include examination of Ms. Ashford's conduct and that of her legal representatives." Harper sat very still. "Additionally," Cho said, "the documented immigration threat constitutes potential coercion under California Penal Code Section 519. I want to be direct with you. This is something we take seriously, and there is a path forward for you that has legal weight behind it." Harper's hands, folded on the table, tightened slightly against each other. "What does that mean in practice?" Harper asked. "It means you are no longer in this alone," Cho said. The meeting ended at 5:40. They came out into the corridor, and Richard immediately turned to a call that had been holding and walked ahead, and Sandra touched Harper's arm briefly and said something quiet that Adrian didn't hear. And then it was Adrian and Harper in the corridor with the institutional light and the gray stone and the sound of the building around them. Harper leaned against the wall. She pressed the back of her head against the stone and looked at the ceiling. He waited. "She's going to fight this," Harper said. "Yes." "It's not over." "No," he said, "but the ground shifted today. She's not working from the position she built anymore. The attorney's office has the documentation. The trust complaint is going to be investigated rather than accepted. The photographer chain leads back to Hale's firm. He paused. She prepared for a lot of things. She didn't prepare for all of it becoming visible at the same time. Harper looked at the ceiling for another moment. I want to see Luna, she said. I'll drive you. They walked toward the elevator. Harper moved with the specific, deliberate quality of someone who has been running on cortisol and focus for 12 hours and can feel the distance between themselves and the ground starting to close. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was Rourke. He answered. She called a press conference, Rourke said. Celeste Ashford, 40 minutes from now, outside her attorney's office in Beverly Hills. A pause. She's going live. He stopped walking. Harper stopped beside him and looked at his face and read whatever was on it. What? She said. He looked at her. She's going live, he said. Press conference, 40 minutes. Harper's expression went through something, a rapid, complete movement of reaction and assessment and arrival. And what it landed on was not fear and was not uncertainty. Then we go, she said. Harper, we go, she said. We don't let her stand in front of cameras for 40 minutes with no answer in the room. Her voice was quiet and absolute. You told me this morning that I wouldn't face tomorrow alone. I'm holding you to that. He looked at her in the institutional corridor light. He thought about everything she had absorbed in 3 years that she had never complained about, had never brought forward, had converted into fuel for the next shift because the alternative was not surviving. He thought about her on her knees on the marble floor. He thought about Luna's yellow sneakers and the picture book pressed against a small chest, and the serious dark eyes of a child who had known, at 3 years old, that the truth mattered even when the adults around her had agreed not to say it out loud. He thought about 40 minutes. Richard, he said, loud enough to carry down the corridor. Richard turned from his call. We need a car, Adrian said. Beverly Hills, now. Richard looked at him. He looked at Harper. He ended his call. They moved. The car covered the distance in 31 minutes through the specific brutality of late afternoon Los Angeles traffic. The city's indifferent gridlock, its absolute refusal to accommodate urgency. Every signal and merge and blocked intersection carrying the same flat democratic weight, regardless of what was at stake in the car, trying to get through it. Adrian sat in the front and watched the time and said nothing. And Harper sat in the back with Sandra. And her hands were flat on her knees, and her eyes were on the window, and she was breathing with the deliberate, metered rhythm of someone managing something very large in a very small interior space. They pulled onto the block outside Douglas Hale's building at 6:22. The press conference had already started. Celeste was at a podium that had been set up on the building's exterior steps, a portable thing, efficient, the kind that gets deployed fast when the decision to go public is made in a hurry. There were cameras. There were 12, 15 people with press credentials. There were phones raised. The evening light was catching everything at that specific angle that makes outdoor Los Angeles press events look more significant than they are. Celeste was speaking. She was composed and precise, and she was in the middle of a sentence about the pattern of fabrication that had been directed against her and the way that people with resources and legal teams could construct false narratives and what it felt like to be a woman standing alone against. She stopped. She had seen Adrian get out of the car. She had seen Harper get out of the car behind him. The cameras, following Celeste's gaze, turned. Harper stood on the sidewalk in the early evening light of Los Angeles with her white shirt and her dark slacks, and her hair down and her hands at her sides. And she looked at Celeste Ashford behind the portable podium with the expression of a woman who has decided, after 2 years and 11 months of looking at the floor, to look up. One of the reporters turned fully toward her and called out, Ms. Delgado, do you have a statement? Harper looked at the cameras. She looked at Celeste. She walked toward the podium. Celeste did not move. She held the sides of the podium, and she watched Harper walk toward her across the sidewalk, and her composure was intact, and her expression was controlled, and underneath both of those things, visible now in a way it had not been visible in the sunroom, or the conference room, or the attorney's meeting, was the first genuine crack, The first real unmanaged signal that something in Celeste Ashford's architecture had just registered that the version of this she had prepared for was not the version that was standing in front of her now. Harper reached the podium. She didn't take it from Celeste. She didn't need to. She simply stopped 4 feet away and stood there, and the cameras moved between them with the instinctive tracking of people who recognize that the most important thing in a frame is not always the person who was there first. "My name is Harper Delgado," she said. Her voice was clear and carried without effort. "I worked in Adrian Mercer's home for 2 years and 11 months. I am a single mother. My daughter is 3 years old." She paused. "I was threatened. I was humiliated. I was told that my immigration status would be reviewed if I reported what was being done to me." She looked directly at the cameras and not at Celeste. "I stayed quiet because I needed the job, because my daughter needed her medication, because I had been taught by everything around me that quiet was the only option available to people like me." A reporter called out something. She didn't stop. "I'm not quiet anymore," she said, "and I am not here to attack anyone. I am here because my daughter was photographed outside our home before sunrise by someone hired to frighten me. And I want every person watching this to understand that is what silencing looks like. That is what it costs to keep one woman from telling the truth." She stopped. The sidewalk was completely still in the way that spaces become still when something real has just been said in them. Not the performed stillness of an audience, but the involuntary suspension of people who have just heard a frequency they were not expecting. Celeste had not moved from the podium. Her hands were still on its sides. Her composure was still technically intact, but the crack that had been visible a moment ago had widened into something that the cameras were going to capture regardless of her management of it, because there are expressions the human face produces that training and discipline cannot fully suppress when the situation has moved past the edge of the prepared script. A reporter stepped forward. "Ms. Ashford, do you want to respond?" Celeste looked at Harper. Harper looked back at her. In the early evening light of a Los Angeles sidewalk, with cameras running and the city moving its indifferent traffic behind them, the two women looked at each other across 4 feet of concrete and everything that had happened inside those marble walls, and Celeste Ashford said nothing. She stepped back from the podium. She turned. She walked back through the building's glass doors, and they closed behind her, and she was gone. The cameras stayed on Harper. Adrian stood on the sidewalk 10 feet back and watched Harper answer the next question, and the one after that, and he felt something shift in the evening air around them. Not resolution, not yet, but the specific quality of a tide that has reached its farthest point and is beginning finally to move the other way. Started, whether either of them had intended it to or not. Then he turned and moved, and the night absorbed him. The group splitting and dispersing with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned long ago how to not be where law enforcement arrived, and Hazel stood on the access road as the first federal vehicle turned onto Terminal Street, with its lights cutting blue across the rain-slicked pavement. She was still standing there when the agents came out of the vehicles, 4 of them, moving toward the warehouse with weapons drawn and the specific, organized urgency of people who had been given coordinates and a time window. One of them clocked her and stopped. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." She looked at him. She was a woman standing alone in the rain on a port access road at night with cracked ribs and yesterday's clothes, and the particular expression of someone who has been through more in the last 26 hours than this agent would process in a month. "I know," she said. "I was just leaving." She turned and walked back toward the street. Behind her, the warehouse door was breached. She heard it, the specific crack of institutional entry, and then voices, commands, the machinery of consequence doing its work. She did not look back. At the end of the access road, she stopped and called a cab, and stood in the rain and felt everything her body had been holding all day begin, incrementally, to release its grip. The adrenaline unwinding, the sustained vigilance relaxing its jaw, the pain of the ribs moving from background architecture to foreground fact. She breathed through it. Let it be real. She had been holding it at arm's length for hours, and now she let it be as bad as it actually was, which was considerable. The cab came. She got in. "Where to?" the driver said. She thought about the South End safe house. She thought about Commonwealth Avenue. She thought about Ethan, 2 blocks from where she'd been standing an hour ago, sleeping in his hospital bed with the monitoring equipment doing its quiet work. "Dorchester," she said. "The cardiac center on Quincy." The driver pulled out. The city moved past the windows. The blue lights of the federal response were already fading behind them, absorbed back into the ordinary luminescence of a Friday night in Boston. She held the phone in her lap. No new messages. She looked at the last one from Vivian. "You're insane." And then the one before it, the 2 words from Sarah. "He's going." She thought about Sarah, about what she'd done and what it had cost and what she'd tried to do at the end when there was almost nothing left to do. About the specific, unglamorous bravery of turning back when turning back meant walking into everything you'd spent 6 years running from. The cab crossed the bridge. The harbor was dark and wide below them. Hazel Monroe looked at it and breathed and let the night carry her toward her brother. The cameras stayed on Harper for 11 minutes. She answered 7 questions. She did not embellish. She did not perform grief or outrage or the telegraphed emotionality that press moments sometimes demand from women who have been wronged, because Harper Delgado had spent 2 years and 11 months learning to perform nothing, and that discipline, which had cost her so much in silence, turned out to be exactly the right instrument for this. She was specific. She was factual. When a reporter asked her how she felt, she said, "I feel like I'm telling the truth for the first time without being afraid of what it costs." Then she said she needed to go be with her daughter, and she stepped back from the podium, and that was the end of it. The clip ran nationally within the hour. By 10 o'clock that night, the 11 minutes had been viewed 4 million times across platforms, which was a number that stopped meaning anything as a number and started meaning something else, a kind of critical mass, a point at which a story stops being a story and becomes a fact about the culture that produced it. Adrian watched the coverage from his study with the sound low, not because he needed to follow it, but because he needed to know the shape of what was moving through the world that Harper's words were now inside. The framing was consistent across outlets that ranged widely in their usual editorial posture. A woman, a child, a marble floor, a crystal pitcher, and 2 years of a silence that had been maintained under duress. The immigration threat was in every version. The photographer outside the building before sunrise was in every version. Luna's yellow sneakers were in none of them. Harper had not mentioned Luna's name or described her with any specificity, a choice that Adrian had noticed and understood. But the image of a 3-year-old pressing a picture book to her chest in a room where something was happening that she was too young to name and too honest to misrepresent had entered the coverage anyway, because the reporters who had done their homework had found the dining room footage, and what the footage showed was something that no amount of counter-narrative architecture could fully re-engineer. Douglas Hale issued a statement at 11:47 withdrawing his client's press conference remarks pending legal review. It was the statement of a man who has looked at the board and understood that the position is lost. Adrian read it once and put his phone face down on the desk. He sat in the quiet of his study for a long time. The estate was still around him, the fountain in the courtyard running its patient sound, the security lights making their slow movements across the garden, the house breathing with the low mechanical hum of a large space maintaining itself through the night. He had lived here for 9 years. He knew the sounds of it the way you know the sounds of any place you have inhabited long enough for them to become ambient, present and unnoticed until something makes you notice them, and then suddenly very loud. He thought about Gloria, who had known for months and had chosen loyalty to Harper's confidence over disclosure to him. He had not been angry about that when she told him. He understood it now more completely than he had then. Understood that the choice she had made was the choice available to someone navigating a system in which the most powerful person's inattention was itself a form of risk, and that what she had done was not a failure of loyalty to him, but a specific and considered act of loyalty to the person who had the least protection. He thought about Elena, who had not gone into the dining room. He thought about all the moments in 6 weeks of footage where a member of his household staff had made the calculation that silence was safer than speech, and had been correct because the system that surrounded them made that calculation correct. And the system had been his house, and the house had been his responsibility. He was not going to resolve that with a charitable foundation or a legal victory or any external act. He knew that. It was internal work, and it was going to take longer than any of the other work, and it was going to be less visible, and there was no footage of it. He picked up his phone. He wrote a text to Harper. "Are you and Luna home?" The response came 4 minutes later. "Yes, she's asleep. I watched the coverage for a while and then I turned it off." He wrote, "How are you?" A longer pause this time. Then, "I don't know yet. Ask me in a week." He wrote, "Okay, in a week." He put the phone down. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but it was a different quality of sleeplessness than the nights before. Not the wired, adrenaline-threaded wakefulness of someone waiting for the next thing to go wrong, but the slower, more honest restlessness of someone beginning to process what has already happened. There is a difference between those two states, and the difference matters, and he was aware of it. The formal investigation by the state attorney's office opened 12 days later. Vera Cho's office moved with a deliberateness that was neither fast nor slow, but was consistent in the specific way that institutions move when they have decided to move, each step generating the next, the documentation accreting, the picture becoming visible by accumulation rather than revelation. Adrian cooperated fully. Sandra Okafor cooperated fully on Harper's behalf. Richard Bow provided every document requested within the hour of each request, which was a form of communication in itself. Celeste Ashford retained new counsel on day 3 of the investigation, a firm out of New York, larger than Hale's, with a different style. The new attorneys were quieter and more careful, and considerably less inclined toward press conferences, which told Adrian something about what they had assessed when they looked at the full documentation. Mara Tyndall recanted her Media Watch statement on day 9. The recantation was issued through her own attorney and was phrased with the specific linguistic care of someone trying to exit a situation without fully acknowledging what they had done to enter it. Language like revised understanding and incomplete information and good faith error, the vocabulary of someone backing carefully through a door they had walked through with great confidence 8 days earlier. Sandra sent Adrian the document with a single line of her own, as expected. He sent it to Harper. Her response was a single word: good. The Labor Board complaint was formally dismissed on day 14 as unfounded, a determination that required less than 48 hours of review once the investigator had access to the estate's full employment compliance records, which were, as Richard had said they would be, entirely clean. On day 19, Douglas Hale's firm announced that it was withdrawing from representation of Ms. Ashford, effective immediately, citing irreconcilable differences regarding case strategy, which was the legal equivalent of a ship's captain putting on a life vest in full view of the passengers. Adrian received this news from Richard while he was in a meeting about the Austin acquisition, which had continued moving through its own timeline with the indifference of business to personal catastrophe, and he absorbed it with a nod and returned to the acquisition discussion, because the acquisition was real work, and real work was, he was finding, one of the few reliable structures that kept the ground solid under him during a period in which a great deal of the ground had turned out to be something other than what he had believed it was. He saw Harper on day 22. She came to the estate to collect the last of her administrative paperwork, the formal documentation of her employment status going forward, which Sandra and Richard had spent 2 weeks negotiating into something that reflected the reality of what had happened, rather than the polite fiction of an ordinary employment arrangement. What they had arrived at was not a settlement in the legal sense. Harper had been clear that she did not want the story of what happened to her converted into a number and sealed, but a restructured arrangement that included a significant increase in her compensation, full health coverage for herself and Luna, and a formal written acknowledgement from Adrian, on a state letterhead, of what had occurred on his property and what his responsibility in it had been. He had written that letter himself. Richard had offered to draft it. He had said no. It had taken him 4 drafts and most of a Sunday afternoon to find language that was honest without being performative, that acknowledged what needed to be acknowledged without converting his guilt into a burden for Harper to carry. The final version was 3 paragraphs. It did not use the word sorry more than once. It said, in the second paragraph, "The conditions that allowed this to continue were conditions I maintained through inattention, and inattention in a position of power is not a neutral act. I understand that now in a way I did not before, and I am committed to understanding it more completely over time." Harper arrived at 11 in the morning, Gloria let her in and then quietly found reasons to be in other parts of the house, which was the most considerate thing she could have done and was entirely characteristic of her. Harper came into the study and Adrian stood from behind the desk, and they looked at each other across the room for a moment with the specific quality of two people who have been through something together and are now in the first ordinary moment on the other side of it, which is always slightly disorienting because ordinary moments after extraordinary ones never feel entirely solid at first. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He slid the documentation package across the desk. She looked at it without touching it for a moment. "The letter is in there," he said. She opened the folder. She found the letter. She read it. He watched her read it without watching her, looked at the window, at the courtyard, at the fountain. He could hear the faint sound of her breathing in the quiet room. When she finished, she set it back in the folder. She was quiet for a long time. "You didn't have to write this yourself," she said. "Yes, I did," he said. She looked at the folder. "The second paragraph," she said. "I know. Inattention in a position of power is not a neutral act." She said it back to him without inflection, not as accusation, as acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of someone hearing themselves reflected accurately and precisely for the first time. "That's for the record," he said. "But I also mean it." She looked up. "I know you mean it," she said. "That's why it's hard to read." He nodded. She closed the folder and held it in her lap. She looked at the window, at the same courtyard he had been looking at, the fountain with its ordinary patient sound. "Luna asked about the fountain this morning," she said. "She asked if we could come see it sometime." "She can come see it whenever she wants," he said. Harper looked at the fountain. "She doesn't know most of what happened," she said. "The press coverage, the investigation. I've kept her away from it. She knows her mother had some trouble at work and that it got fixed. That's the version she has." "That's the right version for 3 years old," he said. "Someday she'll be old enough to look it up." Harper's voice was level and quiet. "Someday she'll search my name and find the footage, and the articles, and the 11 minutes. She paused. "I used to be afraid of that. I used to think the thing to protect her from was the story." She stopped again. "Now I think the thing to protect her from is the lesson that staying quiet is the same as staying safe. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. "No," he said, "they're not." She stood up. He stood. They were at the desk, across from each other, and the study was quiet and the courtyard was bright outside the window, and somewhere in the house Gloria was making the specific sounds of a person doing things in a kitchen with more focus than those things strictly required. "I'm going to enroll in the education program at West Los Angeles College in January," Harper said. It was not asked as a question or offered as information that required his response. It was simply stated in the tone of someone announcing a decision they have made completely on their own and are telling you because you are present and not because they need anything from you. "Early childhood education," he said. "Yes." A pause. "I've wanted to do it for a long time. There was always something that made it impossible. Money, time, the job, the medication, the—" She stopped. There was always a reason why later was the answer. Later when things were more stable. Later when I had more options. She looked at the folder in her hands. "I'm done with later." "Good," he said. She looked at him with the direct, clear-eyed assessment that he had learned was her default mode of seeing. No performance in it, no social management, just the focused, honest attention of someone who has stopped spending energy on the presentation of themselves and redirected it entirely towards seeing the world accurately. "You're going to be all right," she said. It was not reassurance. It was an observation, delivered with the same precision she brought to everything. He considered it honestly. "I think so," he said. "Eventually." "The eventually is important," she said. "I know." She moved toward the door. At the threshold she paused, not the theatrical pause of someone manufacturing a final beat, but the natural pause of someone who has thought of something and is deciding whether to say it. She said it. "I forgive you," she said, "not because you deserve it ahead of earning it, but because carrying it doesn't cost you. It costs me. And I'm done paying for things that aren't mine." He stood at the desk and received that. "Thank you," he said. She left. He stood in the study for a long time after she was gone, with the fountain running outside and the document folder sitting empty on the desk, and the late morning light moving slowly across the floor in the way that light moves through a room when the day is long and unhurried, and nothing more is required of you right now than to simply be present in it. The formal resolution from the state attorney's office came 6 weeks later. The investigation had produced findings on 3 counts: the coercive immigration threat under California Penal Code 519, the unauthorized access to and copying of private trust documents, and the filing of a materially false complaint with a state regulatory body. Celeste Ashford, through her New York attorneys, entered into a negotiated resolution that involved no admission of guilt in the public record, which was the thing her attorneys had fought hardest for and ultimately obtained, but which involved significant financial penalties, a formal cease and desist from any further contact with Harper Delgado or Adrian Mercer, and a private written acknowledgement of the conduct documented in the investigation. The private acknowledgement was sent to Harper through Sandra Okafor. Harper read it once. She put it in a drawer. She did not read it again. This was, Sandra told Adrian when she relayed the account, the most complete form of closure she had ever witnessed a client achieve, not because the document said anything meaningful, but because the act of putting it in a drawer and leaving it there was itself the statement. It said, "This is done, and it no longer requires my attention, and I am somewhere else now." Mara Tyndall lost 2 consulting clients in the month following her recantation, both departures attributed to unrelated factors in the public record and attributed to nothing at all in the private one, which was how these things tend to go when a person's reliability has been publicly questioned, and the people who depend on that reliability make the quiet calculation that dependency is a risk they can manage by finding someone else. Elena, who had stood in the pantry hallway and heard the water pour and had not gone in, came to Adrian's study one morning about a month after everything had settled and stood in the doorway with her hands folded and said she wanted to say something. He told her to come in and sit down. She sat. "I should have gone in," she said, "that day. I should have knocked on that door or called someone or—" She stopped. "I've been thinking about it every day since." He looked at her. "You were afraid," he said. "That's not good enough." "No," he said. "It isn't. But it's what happened, and it's human, and you're here now telling me about it, which is something." He paused. "What would help you?" She looked slightly surprised by the question. "I don't know," she said. "Think about it," he said, "and come back when you know." She nodded and left. He thought about that conversation for a long time afterward, about what it meant for a workplace to be the kind of place where the person who didn't act comes forward to say so, and what conditions made that possible, and what conditions made it impossible, and how much of the difference was structural rather than personal. He hired an organizational consultant 2 months later to do a full review of the estate's household management protocols, not because he had been told to, and not because it was legally required, but because the document he had written to Harper, "Inattention in a position of power is not a neutral act," was a commitment and not just a sentence, and commitments required action that outlasted the moment of their making. The Mercer Foundation's work expanded in the spring. The new initiative, which had been in development since January, built in consultation with Sandra Okafor and 3 other attorneys who specialized in domestic worker protection, funded legal resources for household employees facing workplace abuse, with particular focus on cases involving immigration-based coercion. It was not announced with a press event. It was announced with a paragraph on the Foundation's website, and then it began doing its work, which was the announcement that mattered. Harper started her education program in January. She enrolled on a Tuesday morning, stood in a line at a registration desk at West Los Angeles College with a folder of paperwork under her arm and Luna on her hip because the childcare didn't start until the 2nd week, and she had decided that Luna being present at the enrollment was not a problem to be managed, but a moment to be kept. And she filled out every form in the careful, methodical handwriting of someone who has signed a great many documents in their life that had real consequences and therefore does not sign things carelessly. The woman at the registration desk looked at the form and then at Luna and said, "Is she yours?" "She is," Harper said. "She's beautiful," the woman said. Luna, who had been examining the edge of the registration desk with the focused scientific attention she brought to most physical surfaces, looked up at this and said, I know, with complete seriousness, and the woman behind the desk laughed and Harper laughed. And it was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere below the sternum and doesn't require any management on the way out. She texted Adrian from the parking lot afterward, enrolled. He wrote back, "How did it feel?" She thought about it for a moment, standing beside the old Honda with Luna already buckled into the car seat, and the afternoon sun doing its Los Angeles thing across the college buildings and the palm trees and the ordinary, relentless, indifferent beauty of a city that does not notice or care about any individual life being lived inside it, and yet which contains those lives in all their specific and irreducible weight. She wrote back, "Like something that was mine the whole time and I just picked it up." He read it and put the phone in his pocket and went back to whatever the afternoon required of him. 3 months later, Adrian walked through the estate on a Sunday morning that had no particular agenda and found himself in the dining room. He stood in the doorway the way he had stood on a different Saturday afternoon, looking at the marble floors and the antique sideboard and the crystal pitcher that had been replaced. The original was somewhere in a box in the estate's storage, removed by someone on the staff after everything happened, quietly, without discussion, with the specific instinct of people who understand that some objects carry a history that makes their continued presence in a room into a kind of argument. The new pitcher was similar. Different glass, slightly different proportions, the same function. He walked into the room and stood in the center of it. The room was clean and quiet and full of morning light. It looked exactly as it was supposed to look, beautiful, maintained, expensive, the architectural expression of a life that had been built with significant care and considerable resources. It looked, from the outside, like the interior of a life that was going well. He thought about what it had also been. He thought about Harper on her knees in this room, in this light, on this floor, with water running down her face, and her jaw set and her hands continuing to work. He thought about a 3-year-old pressing a picture book to her chest. He thought about what it cost to survive in a room that looked like this while being treated like nothing inside it, and he thought about the specific strength required to do that over and over without letting it change the person you were determined to remain, and he thought about how completely he had failed to see it, and how the failure had not been malicious but had been real, and how real failures require real accounting even when, especially when, the person who failed would prefer a more comfortable reckoning. He stood in the room for a while. Then he left it and went outside into the courtyard where the fountain was running and sat down on the stone bench beside it, which was something he had rarely done. The bench was decorative, a design element, not something he had ever thought of as a place to actually sit. And he sat there in the Sunday morning quiet with the water running beside him and the garden around him and the city somewhere beyond the walls going about its ordinary business. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a photograph from Harper. Luna, in a classroom, sitting in a small chair at a low table with other children around her, her picture book open in front of her, reading, or doing the 3-year-old version of reading that was mostly narration and interpretation and a healthy disregard for the actual text, to a child sitting beside her who was listening with the focused, serious attention of someone receiving important information. Below the photograph, Harper had written, "She asked if she could bring the horse book to school. I said yes." He looked at the photograph for a long time. Luna's yellow sneakers were visible under the table, swinging slightly above the floor. He wrote back, "She's going to be extraordinary." Harper's response came after a moment. "She already is." He put the phone in his pocket. He sat by the fountain in the Sunday morning light and listened to the water and let the quiet of it be what it was. Not the quiet of absence, not the quiet of things unsaid, but the specific and earned quiet of a space that has been through something and has come out the other side still standing, changed in the ways that matter and intact in the ways that count. The fountain ran. The garden held its green. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Culver City with drawings taped to the refrigerator and a car outside with 160,000 miles on it, a woman who had been told her whole life that her options were limited was sitting at a kitchen table with her textbooks open, learning the things she had always known she was meant to learn, in the life she had always known she was meant to live, on the other side of every door that had been held closed against her, and that she had finally, at the cost of everything that fear had made her carry, decided to walk through anyway. She was not a story about survival. She was not a lesson about resilience, or a symbol of anything larger than herself, or a face on a movement, or a counter-narrative to someone else's lie. She was Harper Delgado. She was Luna's mother. She was, at last, entirely her own.